she did it anyway. She's my backup. So I know it's pretty well. I'm just excited to like see. I know like say a lot. I don't think it's nice. So it won't necessarily be as much information. At least I just like probably I don't think that's I'm really into this scene. We'll say since yeah, so if I say the other like two steps that my living is just qualified. So that'll be interesting. I saw that. I didn't know that. I just a baby grand yeah. Well,
ladies, we are going to get started. If you could all please take a seat. Good morning, ladies, and welcome to the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women's 28th Annual Washington, D.C. Summit. My name is Kimberly Begg. I am the president of the Luce Center, where we empower young women to live happier, freer lives. Since 1993, the Luce Center has educated and mentored thousands of young women through internships, summits and seminars, campus lectures, firearms training, and other programs that provide specialized support for women who face incredible pressure to conform to a leftist worldview. We have a fantastic program for you today. You will be hearing from Paula Scanlan, Alexandra DeSanctis Marr, Catherine Pakaluk, and Allie Beth Stuckey. Now, we hope to have time for Q&A after every speaker. So just raise your hand if you have a question. We will bring a microphone to you. We ask that you stand up when you say your question and that you state your name and your school or the place that you are interning at this summer. Now, after each speaker, we will have a fast-moving photo line. You will have the opportunity to get photos with your favorite speakers. So we ask that you please just make it through the photo line quickly. Now, a few brief words about the materials in front of you. You will see a postcard in your fanny pack. You will need this postcard immediately following the remarks from Allie Beth Stuckey. So on the back of the postcard, there is a QR code. You will need to use your phone to go to the website from the QR code to give us your feedback on the event today. And you will need to do this before getting your photo with Allie Beth Stuckey. Now, there is also a sticker in your fanny pack, and there's also a QR code on the sticker, and you can use this to go to our social media platforms. So the Luce Center is on X and Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. And by going to our social media platforms and connecting with us online, this is the best way to stay in contact with the Luce Center. And also the best way to help you tap into our national network of conservative women. So now I would like to welcome to the podium Isela Becerra, who is interning at the Luce Center this summer. And Isela will be leading us in the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning, ladies. My name is Isela Becerra, and I am a political science student at Biola University and am a Luce Center intern this summer. It is my immense pleasure to start off the 2024 Luce Center DC Summit with prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would now rise for prayer and stay standing for the pledge. Thanks. Dear God, we come before you this morning to commit the Luce Center's Washington, D.C. Summit to you. We pray that you will be glorified through our speakers' words and the overall experience of these students. Through this gathering, we desire to bring truth to light, understanding that we cannot do this without the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So we invite you into this place. We pray you will use our experience today to inspire more young women to answer the calling you have given them to courageously proclaim the truth. Please place your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all again to our 2024 DC Intern Summit. My name is Yael Shavelson, and I'm proud and incredibly grateful to be interning at the Luce Center this summer. Our first speaker today is Paula Scanlan, a prominent defender of women's single-sex spaces and advocate for free speech. The former NCAA swimmer and current spokeswoman for the Independent Women's Forum made waves when she spoke out about having to compete with trans-identifying swimmer Leah Thomas and being forced to share a bathroom with him. Paula's story hits home for me because, as a freshman, I was forced to share a bathroom with a transgender woman as well. Neither my university nor the biological man I often showered next to seemed to care that this was an all-female dorm. In fact, the only all-female dorm on campus. Scanlan spoke out against the destruction of women's spaces on Matt Walsh's incendiary documentary, What is a Woman? Since then, she has testified before Congress on her experience sharing a locker room with Thomas and has talked at campuses across the country about the necessity of standing up for what is moral and true. Please join me in a round of applause for Paula Scanlan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I know there's a lot of other political things happening, particularly last night. So I definitely was watching that, and that was very interesting, to say the least. I will not divulge in commentary on that at the moment, but just had to address it. But yes, I appreciate all of you guys so much. But more than anything, I appreciate being in a room of women, but not just in a room of women, a room of real women, and a room of women that I know support me and respect me, because nowadays that's actually not so common. So that I just truly want to say this means the world. I love Claire Booth Luce. The last time I spoke, I found out she's actually from Connecticut originally. And as someone from Connecticut myself, it's not common that we see conservative women up there. So that also is just really great to have that experience, to see all of that. But that being said, I'm just going to share briefly. I know many of you are probably familiar, but I'm going to share my experience of what happened to me while I was in college and just how that shaped my perspective on how to stand up for myself, my perspective on how to be a strong woman and do womanly things, but also stand up for the truth. Because in this world, a lot of people are afraid to speak even common basic truths, a truth that's so simple as the difference between male and female. So I started swimming at age 8 competitively. And very quickly, I realized it was something I really loved and I wanted to do it in college. And I continued to work hard through my career. Like all college athletes, I dedicated many hours to swimming. And eventually, I was able to get accepted to the University of Pennsylvania, which was a dream come true until it quickly became a nightmare, which we'll obviously get into. And so in this experience, I joined my team. Everything is normal my freshman year, but things started to go south my sophomore year, which at the time is the fall of 2019. The fall of 2019, our coach says, we have a mandatory team meeting right before practice. And I remember this very vividly. It was a Friday afternoon. And our coach is standing there with a member of the men's team. His name was William Thomas. And he looks at Will and says, Will, this is your meeting. Before he even began to speak, I said, why does a member of the men's team need to run a women's team meeting? And he simply looked at all of us and said, I am transgender and I will be transitioning to your team next season. Please refer to me with she, her pronouns. Keep in mind at this time, the name Leah had not been announced yet. So we were expected to call a member of the men's team who was changing the men's locker room, competing on the men's team, also going by the name William. We were expected to refer to him with she, her pronouns. And if anyone ever slipped up, we were told that we were hateful, we were bigoted, and we were non-inclusive. Imagine how confusing that is. It's the interesting thing about this whole pronoun issue is my family's from Taiwan originally, my mom's side of the family. In Chinese, he and she is the same word. So my grandmother oftentimes calls me he, and you don't see me calling in a hate crime for my 87-year-old grandmother. But yet we're in a day and age now where if you accidentally mess up calling a male William by she, her, we're told that we're the problem and we're hateful. So that was incredibly difficult, but the worst is that they continued to train us on it. We'd have classes talking about the usage of these pronouns and all of this stuff. And it was mind-boggling because that's something I had never expected I would need to be learning in college as an 18 to 22-year-old. But again, this is where we are today in this country. And as time went on, eventually there was a gap year because of COVID and all of that. I'm sure if any of you guys were in high school or college at the time, you know how crazy that was. And eventually, 2 years later now, it's the fall of 2021, I'm now a senior. Thomas joins our team. And in this experience, we were originally told that he would not be undressing in the locker room with us. We show up for the first day of practice in September, and he has a locker next to everyone else's, and we're expected to undress with him in this locker room. One of my friends had the locker next to him, and she went to our coach and said, "This is a joke, right?" She said, "There is no way you expect me to undress every single week this entire season next to a 6'4" tall man." And our coach looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but if you want to be on this team, that's what you have to do." And she accepted it like I did, like all of my other teammates, because we felt privileged to be able to compete in college. I had worked so hard my entire life to be accepted to such a good school, to be able to swim D1. I wasn't ready to give that up, even if it meant subjecting myself to undressing next to a man. I wasn't ready to give up everything I had worked for my entire life because I simply wanted to stand up for the truth. I know now that, of course, I should have, but that's the situation they put us in, and they know us as women, we're never going to do that. No woman wants to give up everything that she's ever worked for to just stand up for something. It's so hard, especially being the lone person that does that, because you want everyone else in the room to agree with you, and you're afraid to say that because you don't know what the people next to you are thinking. And that is really explanatory of the entire situation, the entire season that we're in. It was so many different people had this opinion of whether it was the locker room or whether it was the competition. They knew it was unfair, but they were so afraid to say what they thought in their mind out loud because they were worried about the validation and acceptance of everyone around them. And again, this is something us as women struggle with more than the men. And it's not a negative thing necessarily. It's just the reality of us being compassionate, of our nature to be mothers, our nature to be loving. And so as the season went on, I continued to observe this. And at the beginning, it was unclear whether Thomas was how fast he was going to swim. And of course, as soon as he got in the pool, he broke every team record in every single event that he swam. He boosted our team scores in every meet he competed in. And it was as bad as you could probably imagine a 6'4" tall man competing on a women's swim team. Eventually, Thomas went on and won an NCAA championship in the 500-yard freestyle. By the way, the University of Pennsylvania has never had a female NCAA champion. So it really boosted our team from having never scored points at that meet to placing top 20 in the country. And by the way, the girls he beat in that race were all Olympic medalists. They weren't just Olympians. They have medals from the Olympics, and they placed after him in that event. If that shows anyone anything, you don't have to know anything about swimming or sports for that matter to know that is completely ridiculous and insane. But what's worse about the situation is not that outcome, because of course everybody saw that. The entire world saw that happen, and there were protesters at that meet. The entire world was outraged by the situation. What the worst was is the way that they treated anyone who objected. So as the season went on, the beginning, the university and the athletic department tried to ignore the problem, because that is always what seems to happen in these situations. It's not a real issue if we ignore it. But before they could get a hold of us, the media started to figure out what was going on, because it's not hard to figure out that a senior who's never competed before, if you look at his history, you find out he was on the men's team. So eventually some reporters figure this out, and it becomes a media story, because it should be. And it actually, for me, it was painful how long it took for somebody to realize and put two and two together. So the media begins picking up, and the university realizes at this point they need to do damage control. So they send in administrators to us. They say mandatory team meeting for the women. You must be here at this time. We don't care if you have class. We don't care what your other commitments are. You will be at this meeting. Notably, they told Leah to not come to the meeting. So it was just the real women on the team, and Leah was told to stay home. We show up to the pool deck, and there is no fewer than 12 administrators standing there. And they look at us and they say, Leah being on this team is a non-negotiable. Whether you like it or not, Leah will be competing, so you might as well get on board. And they said, and if you need any other indications that this is going to happen, they say, you will never be able to find a job if you object to this publicly. They told us that it was hateful and discriminatory if we ever spoke against it. They told us that we would be tainted by it for the rest of our lives, and anyone you would ever meet would look you up online and see that you were a hateful, transphobic bigot. And the scariest thing about that is telling 18 and 22-year-old girls that they'll never be able to find a job. I mean, the entire purpose of going to college is to eventually find employment. Of course, you're going to have a hard time accepting that. And they continue to just push this messaging to us. They continue to say, you're hateful. You will never be able to find a job. Your life will be over. Everything you've worked for will be ruined. And they said, if everything we've just said is not enough for you, if everything we've just threatened you with is not enough, please seek psychological services. And they had a representative from psychological services stand up and say, I'm here. Please take my number. And it was at this point I realized this was not just about controlling the narrative. This was about re-education. They wanted us to think a certain way, because you don't go to therapy for being uncomfortable and dressing with a man. You go to therapy and they tell you that you're hateful. They tell you that you're wrong. They tell you that you need to accept this. And that is the messaging that they push to us continually. And also at this meeting, they had a representative from the LGBT Center who told us that inclusion of trans individuals is so important in society. They also told us that if we don't include trans identified individuals in society, that they will commit suicide and it will be our fault. And that is incredibly scary to tell young girls that they're contributing to someone's suicide if you simply object to competing and undressing alongside a male. And by the way, it was not just my university that did this. The girls at Harvard swimmers, they were also emailed in writing saying the same exact thing. And it was clear to me that the messaging on this issue was identical at all the schools. I saw the exact language that the Harvard girls were sent, and it was the same thing I was told. And even other universities that even weren't in the Ivy League that were forced to compete against Thomas, when I talked to those other athletes and shared their experiences, they said their universities had similar responses to the situation. And it showed me how overreaching this push for wanting women to accept men into their spaces, into their sports. And the worst part about all of it is the lack of ability to talk about it. And by the way, we were undressing with Thomas at this point 18 times every single week in that locker room. This was not something we were just doing once or twice. We were expected to fully undress next to a man 18 times every single week. I don't know what parent would want their daughter doing that, and I certainly would never wish anyone would do that. I heard my introduction today saying that she was forced to do that at her school. This is happening across the country. This is not just about sports. You don't have to be an athlete to be hurt by this issue. This is happening in bathrooms, locker rooms, even women's prisons. We've been hearing stories of female prisoners that are being forced to share prison cells with males, many of which have predatory crimes that brought them there. This issue is really an attack on women, and it is getting so far because they know us women are accommodating. They know us women want to be loving and caring, and they are exploiting that. And that is what's so hard about this, but also what gives me hope, because I'm looking at a room full of you guys that I know wouldn't stand up for this. And that is really why it's important for us to stand strong on this and support each other and support speaking out and support speaking the truth, because everyone knows deep down males and females are different. And we've come to a point where we just can't even admit basic truths out loud. And in my experience at the university, I continued to try to talk about this, and I was constantly met with teammates and coaches and professors saying that my messaging was hateful. I even had professors in other courses trying to force us to be trans inclusive, whatever that means, saying that if you object to anyone who identifies as a woman, that you are somehow against women. I've been called the word misogynist so many times. What I don't understand is, how is it not misogynistic to force women to give up their scholarships, their roster spots, their opportunities? Why are we convincing women that it's important to undress in locker rooms with men? I don't know why that's not considered misogyny, but for some reason, if I don't accept a male being a woman, I'm the problem. And it's truly, it's just, I don't even know how we got here. I really, truly am just, it's just shocking to even have to say this, I never thought when I was growing up, when I took biology freshman year of high school, that I would ever have to defend and justify the differences between male and female. But here we are. And I think what this taught me is this is so much deeper than just that, because we are at a point where you're not allowed to speak your mind on anything. I know of people who have been failed in courses because they are saying there's differences between men and women. People are getting cited by their universities for objecting to undressing with men in locker rooms and bathrooms. And this is just the start. People think this is really bad so far. It is. But we are reaching this point in this country where if you can't talk about these issues, where are we? And I saw this further when I actually tried to write an op-ed for the school newspaper. So as the season goes on, I noticed there was a lot of pro-Leah content coming out, which shocked me, because polling actually shows that at least 85% of people in this world agree that men should not compete on women's sports teams. But again, they still highlight the people who are on the other side of this, which is fair. That's their right to. I appreciate trying to read the other side on this issue. While I don't agree with them, I do appreciate their right to be able to do that. And they were pushing all these articles out. And eventually I said, okay, let's write something on the opposing side. And I said, I just want to analyze the NCAA policy that allowed this, which, by the way, the NCAA policy, which is still in place today, says 1 year of testosterone suppressant is enough to make a man fair to compete on a women's swim team, or any women's sports team, sorry, for that matter. And obviously, testosterone suppressant for 1 year does not take away the differences between men and women, because men on average are taller, have larger lungs, have higher bone density. Even males' hips are narrower than women. So in a sport like swimming, when you push off the wall, males' bodies are actually more hydrodynamic and they would push off further. There's just so many differences that are not accounted for by just one hormone in the human body. And I analyzed all of that. I said exactly that men and women are different. I analyzed the differences between times in many sports. And I didn't say anything really about Thomas as an individual, because that was not the goal, because actually Thomas was following the rules. It was the rules that were the problem. And we write this article and they edit it and they take out lines and lines. And they told me I was hateful for putting the sentence in there saying, if we continue to allow this to happen, women will be discouraged from competing in sports. And they said, that line is offensive and rude. How is it offensive and rude? It's true. If we allow men to take our spots, women will be discouraged. I didn't realize that was controversial, but I conceded and I said, okay, you can take it out as long as we can get it published. Eventually, after many lines of retracting and edits and censorship, eventually they do publish this article. But within a couple of hours, it's quickly retracted, with no notice to myself and no notice to any of the readers. Just silence. They wanted to pretend like it didn't happen. And I tried to find out what happened with it and why it was retracted so quickly. And eventually, after weeks of hounding this editor I was working with, he told me that the entire staff was threatening to quit over the article being published because they said they couldn't stand by student-led transphobia. Because apparently analyzing the differences between Olympic times between men and women and talking about science and hormone levels and bone density is somehow transphobia, whatever that word means, because I'm frequently called that, and I don't even know what it means anymore, to be entirely honest, because it is used so often and in every single context that you could imagine if you say anything about this issue. But it was truly at this point, again, I realized this is so much bigger than men competing on women's swim teams. This is so much bigger than not wanting to undress in a locker room 18 times with a man. We have reached the point where we are afraid to say the truth. We are afraid to use our voices, and we are afraid to listen to people with opposing viewpoints. And that is what really broke my heart in this situation, because this country was built on people disagreeing with each other. It's actually important that you disagree with other people. I certainly hope every single one of you in this room do not have all the same exact viewpoints on everything, because if not, I would be leading a cult meeting if every single one of you believes the same thing. It is true. And that's what's so interesting is us on the more conservative side, we do disagree with each other. I spend all my time hanging out with different conservatives, and we get into arguments about various different things. Every single issue. And I don't even need to get into any of them. You can imagine there's nuances to every single viewpoint, and you have your own life experiences to shape the way that you think and shape why you believe something. And sometimes those viewpoints adapt. Sometimes you experience something and it changes your view on it. Or sometimes you get into a debate with somebody and they're able to change your viewpoint, which is incredibly powerful. Or you debate somebody and your own viewpoint becomes stronger. It's in those debates that we figure out the solutions to these issues, and we figure out where you stand better. You've either become stronger in your own viewpoint or your mind has changed, and both of those things are equally powerful. And especially as women, we're told to not debate that way. But no, I encourage all of you to get into that. Even in the breaks, talk about some of these issues, and don't be afraid to have the person next to you disagree. And so after I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, I did a lot of anonymous things. I was anonymously in the What is a Woman documentary, but I wasn't ready to risk everything. I wasn't ready to risk that job they told me I was never going to have if I spoke out. And it was interesting because I went on to this corporate workplace and I started talking to my coworkers about normal things. And eventually people figured out I was a swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania. And of course, my situation came up because everyone in the world knew how completely insane it was. And I remember this one time I was having a conversation with a coworker, and he very subtly said, "Oh, what are your thoughts about the situation?" without disclosing his own opinion on the matter. And I said, "Absolutely, it was completely ridiculous and insane." And he says, "Oh, I'm so glad that you think that." And I said to him, "Okay, so you agree with me, but you were not willing to disclose what you thought about it until I gave you an answer. Why?" And he says, "I didn't want to hurt your feelings. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to be upset." And I looked at him and I said, "No matter what I believed on it, you should have led with what you thought." Because it's those types of people, and again, no shade to this coworker at all, great person, but it's because of that behavior we've gotten to where we are, because we're in situations where everybody in the room agrees, but nobody's willing to be the first person to do it. And that is, again, where really hard and dangerous things come. And so obviously many of you guys, if you're familiar with who I am, you definitely know who Riley Gaines is. And so she was able to be that first person in the room. And why I bring this up is it was actually in my friendship with Riley Gaines that I'm here before all of you today, because I saw that she could do it. And I said, okay, if she can do it, so can I. And why I share this with you is because you need to be that first person, because you need to empower other people. And that's why it is so important to speak the truth and to do that, but also not to be afraid to be a woman that does that. Because we look at men a lot of the times, and men are more oftentimes leaders. And this is, again, not to be discriminatory to women. We are all amazing. I know every single one of you in this room is amazing. But oftentimes women are afraid to take that step and to step out away from the group. And I was certainly afraid of that. And in my team, none of my teammates have publicly spoken out at all about this. And it was really to be the sole person in the collective group that I was to have the opinion. But what I learned in it is how much more important it was to be that person, because I've made so many more friends. I've been able to be so much more confident. I've just been better off in my entire life, because living in a lie is so hard. It was so challenging to sit back and watch this continue to happen. A story I like to share a lot is there's this high school athlete, Peyton McNabb. She's a high school volleyball player. You're familiar with the video, but she was knocked unconscious in a high school volleyball game. And I watched that happen, and it was heartbreaking. And I realized that if I didn't speak out, I was part of the problem of allowing things like that to happen. And that's really when I started to realize, I don't care what friends I lose. I don't care what job I lose. I am part of the problem if I don't speak out to this. And so the reason I share this is you don't want to get to that point. You want to be, as soon as you see something, you say something. And so with that, I mean, obviously, I don't hope any of you ever experiencing something as crazy as having a 6'4" tall man try to join your women's swim team, because it was certainly an unprecedented event, which is still happening across the country at various different levels and capacities. But it doesn't need to take something as crazy as that. It's just simple things that you see. When you see something wrong, when you see something that isn't truthful, it's so important to say something about it, and to not be afraid to be the lone person in the room that's doing it, and to not be afraid to be a woman that's saying those things. I know as a woman, it's so hard, because you want to be loving, you want to be caring, and you are all of those things. But what I really struggled with, and this is what I will leave you guys with, is to tell the truth is to be loving and caring. And I have struggled with that a lot, because as a Christian, I want to love, but I also need to balance truth. And in anyone in this situation, the loving thing is to tell the truth. And so when you struggle with that, just remember that you are doing this from a place of love. And this is not against any of these men who think that they're women or want to invade our spaces. We should love them. And the loving thing to do is to tell them no, and tell them the truth, and to also stand up for ourselves. And so with that, I thank all of you guys for being here. I really hope that you can continue on in your journey of whatever it is you choose to do as a career, or going back to college, or taking this year in university. It is so, so, so important to stand by that, to be strong, to be willing, to be brave. And I am just honestly so encouraged by just having you guys even be here today, because a couple of years ago, this would not be something people would want to listen to, because they would say, this is too controversial. I'm not going to attend. So even just being here is, I know everyone will continue to empower more people. It's so important you continue to bring these messages to other people in your community, and just be bold and brave and be truthful. And you will be so successful when you do all of that. So thank you guys so much.
We may take questions now.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing your story. My name is Catherine Musgrove, and I graduated from Liberty University, and now I'm interning with Family Research Council. And I just was curious how the parents took that information when it first started coming out, and if they did anything for that.
Yes. A lot of parents did try to write letters to the NCAA, obviously fell on deaf ears. NCAA still not changed their policy. I think if seeing a fully grown man win an NCAA championship is not enough for them, I don't know what more evidence they need. But many of the parents did try to write letters to the NCAA. Again, no response. For my parents personally, because this is the only thing I can really personally speak to, I think my parents were having such a hard time processing that this was even real. I would come home from on breaks and I would say, Mom, Dad, there's a man changing in the locker room with me. And my dad would laugh. My mom would laugh. They thought it was funny. And I think that's sort of where that shows how insane this issue really is, right? It's something that's just so crazy that no one can process it. And that's really why it's so important we talk about it, because we have to share these stories, like my own, like many of the other women I know. We have to share these stories so people think it's real, right? That's why having a face to it is so important. That's why the girl gave me the introduction. Please continue to share your story about what you went through at your university, because they need to hear those personal stories in order to be moved by this. And again, the parents tried. It's just, for them, this is just something they never thought could be real. And again, I think my parents didn't even fully process the entire situation until after I had graduated. I was long gone by the time they realized, wait a minute, you were undressing in a locker room with a man 18 times every single week. My dad was like, I would have ran down there and yanked you out of there if I had fully processed that. So again, that's why the personal stories being shared is how we fix that, is how we be successful on that. And that's why, again, no matter how small it is, or if it just happened one time, it's so important that you add the personal aspect to it and you share it to as many people that are willing to listen.
Hi, my name is Sydney Fraser. I'm a student athlete as well at the University of Michigan, and I'm interning in Senator Cruz's office. Something that you said that really stood out to me was that we can think about, Thomas and kind of criticize them as much as we want, but at the end of the day, they were just following the rules. So how, in your opinion, do we get to the root of the problem and change the rules on a broader scale than just criticizing individual people?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I start to do full time now, actually. So I have written, I don't even know how many letters to various individuals of the NCAA. But something I work on in my day-to-day role is legislation. Right now, state level is what we're working with, because the federal current administration is not going to pass something that is favorable to our cause, to say the very least. But something I've been working on is going to these states and testifying on bills that either protect women's sports or go further and include spaces like bathrooms, locker rooms, prisons, you name it. And so that is something that obviously takes a lot of time, a lot of work, takes connections in states, but that is really how this is done. I mean, I know there's a lot of activists in the conservative space that the parameters for it was about the NCAA championship in particular. So Riley Gaines is the lead name on there. And that is something this is going to help. So passing legislation and lawsuits, but for everyday people, legislation is pushed by grassroots efforts. So if send letters to your congressman, send letters to your local government. Every single state we've passed legislation in, we have grassroots connections that were able to push it over the finish line. And I truly mean this. I stand by this. I don't think there's a single thing in this country that's been done successfully that wasn't helped by grassroots efforts. So again, be as vocal as you can, share with the community. I don't know, get your mom to post about it on Facebook. I'm actually being serious. I have seen Facebook mom groups push legislation. There's a group in, if any of you are from Colorado, there's a ballot initiative going on in Colorado. And it's literally moms on Facebook posting about it. And they've gotten thousands of signatures that way. So, and again, that is how change is made. So it's so important you get involved at that capacity. And again, it does not involve being on the news. It does not involve going and testifying personally. It's really those small efforts that you make. And that is how we win on this issue.
This will be our last question.
Hi, my name is Amelia. I'm interning for Kevin Kiley's office on the House of Representatives side. As an athlete, I just wanted to ask how you kept going your senior year. As an athlete, you spent your entire life working towards getting to college, and it's your last year. So in the pool, when you're working every single day, every single competition, how are you moving forward with this adversity you're facing in the locker room?
I've actually never been asked that at a speech, so I really appreciate that question. It was really challenging, to say the least. But my biggest takeaway from it was every single season in every sport, there's always adversity that you face. When I was in high school, I injured my shoulder pretty badly. Shoulder injuries are very, very common, and that was something I had to work through. And so my way was just saying, okay, this is just another piece of adversity. Well, it was one I never expected to happen, right? I maybe when I was younger knew I could possibly get injured because that's pretty common. It was just another thing you have to deal with. I know that just things are thrown at you that you don't necessarily know that you're able to get through, but you always do. And I think that it's just keeping strong, keeping your faith, and just continuing on everything is just how you get through any situation. And that was, and it was not easy. I will not lying to you. I had a lot of nights where I was saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be on this team. I don't want to deal with this. But I knew that it was my last year. I knew it was so much I had worked for. I knew that I wanted to be able to finish college and finish a full season my senior year. And it was just really just trying my best to work past it. And again, that's how you succeed in anything, is just continuing to work hard and continuing to just focus on yourself. And I know that's like kind of not the best answer, but I mean, it's how you deal with anything, because there's, again, whether it was going to be this, there was probably going to be something else I would have faced that year. And so just knowing that in my heart just helped me. Yeah.
All right.
Thank
you, Paula, so much. We appreciate your story. So if you want to do pictures now, so if anyone wants to line up right up here, we'll do pictures right in front of the banner here. And then after that, make sure to be back in your seat by 11:05 for Alexandra. Okay, yeah, we'll form the line right over here, so.
Yeah, a professional, yes. Okay, you want to over
Yeah,
here?
I want to start.
In the center there. Bob, you want to place Paula where it's the best?
They want to just...
Yes, go ahead.
Do I have my phone?
No. We're going to take professional ones.
You'll have access to
You'll
them.
have access to all of them.
being here too.
Hold on 1 second.
What am I? I don't know.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
next one. Next.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. I was like,
There we go.
there it is.
If y'all want to take your name tags off, you don't want that on your picture. Yep, okay, next time. Get ready, let's go.
So much. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm working here. Okay, good, great. Thank you very much, Paula. Good, perfect. Next one.
Of course, thank you for listening.
Scanlan, how are you? Good to see you. I know. Okay, next, good, perfect.
Of course.
Megan, intern after intern. I know, did you hear in California? Yes, good, great. We can come a little closer so that we can make the walk. We gotta get through these, so it's, get ready to walk. It's a time crunch. It's a time crunch, but we want to get everyone in. Go ahead. Walk. Good. You want to take your name tag off? It might be better, but it's up to you. Okay, ready? Keep on going.
This is so efficient. I'm honestly very impressed.
I know. Next.
Thank you. Oh my God. Hi, so nice to meet you.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you. Of course. Thank you for being here and listening.
Perfect. Next one. Perfect. Now you know what to do. Not much either. You talk about just so that, you know, when you get it, you're like, oh, I know that thing. You have to Photoshop it up. Okay, next. Perfect.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, ready? Walk on up.
Do you hold anything when you guys are
Go ahead. Walk on it. I just tell you my mom.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, I was just there last summer.
I haven't been in a while.
Okay, go ahead.
I have citizenship too, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm dual citizen. Yeah.
How are you today? Well, this morning. It's only 10:40.
I know.
I know. All right, next one up. Thank you very much.
How are you doing?
Good. You can keep the gap so that's not so. Let me get it right. Okay, next.
I'm actually impressed how efficient. Hi. Oh my gosh.
Okay, next. Perfect. Perfect.
Person.
You might want to take your name tag off so you don't show the face as much, but it's up to you. Go ahead, AJ. Yeah, just hold it. Or you can put it on the table, whatever works best for you. Perfect. Next one up. That'll look so pretty in the pictures. Okay, next, good. Thank you so much for doing this. Well, you know, it's going to be on. You'll have access to all of them, and then you can show people and post them, and that'll be great. I love your work. Really, I love Dylan. We don't have any Dillers up there. I know. I see that. I would take a name tag off, so that's not, you know, like it's not in the middle of the picture. Okay, next one up. Perfect.
Hi. So much pain. I know.
Emma, you might want to take your name tag off just so it's not so. Go ahead. Name tag's off. You can put it right back on. Okay, go ahead. Don't be shy. Oh, there's a little. Go on I mean, it won't be as
Right. But I want to get everyone's outfits is so nice. I'll have earnings.
Come on up, Joey. Let's get ready to go.
Especially because then, like, it's also cheaper.
Perfect.
She has the best on her.
Good.
Feel bad.
Like, not ideal.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, next one up. I want to take your name tag off. Picture? No, we want you to look at it later. Put that picture next to her. Okay?
Hey, nice to meet you.
Okay, next one. Go on up.
Good. Someone else said that. I'm glad to hear.
Everybody, everyone gets a photo. A lot of times you don't get a photo. You're like, oh, I wish I had. Go on up. Perfect. Go on up. Hi. Oh, good. It's getting better as the day goes. Perfect. Next one. Go on up. You girls bring it. Name tag off. Will look better in the picture. Next.
Paula, thank you so much for being here. There's like 2 girls that I met.
Next one.
Oh my gosh. So
Okay. Go on up. Lindsay. Oh. Yeah, come get a picture. Come on. Yeah, come on. And then we should get all the interns. Take your name tag off. Well, we can stay up here. Go ahead, Leah. We can do a group too, but let's get it. Go ahead. Stay. Hey, yeah. Lindsay, gather the interns to get one. Okay. But if they don't have their phones on. Okay, next to Stella. Wait, really? No, individual, and then we'll do a group.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. Okay, Rebecca, that's good. So we have other people that are interns, it's just fine. No, but oh yeah, we're having an issue here. Go ahead. Next. We're gathering our interns. Okay, next. Okay, do we have all the loose interns?
Okay,
All interns? Nicole, take your name tag off, okay? So it's not so prominent in the picture. Where's Olivia? Olivia? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Take your name tag. Olivia, take your name tag off. Okay, should be 4 and 4.
But
Perfect.
scooch over just a little bit, just a bit. Okay. Hold on one second.
Look great.
Okay, perfect.
Of course, thank you all so much for what you do. Oh, I know. I saw some nice protesters who were doing very nice press conference. That's why there's just really crazy on the street. No, outside of Supreme Court. There's like this protester who's always there apparently beside the river and next to him and sitting for last music. And it was yeah. It was people that was like
Don't go to the
I do not. And if I live in California, I'm like so scared.
Where was it?
I was in Sacramento State, and there were more members of the NCAA there than people who attended my speech, which was a little bit scary. And it was like the coalition of bookstore owners, which is like bookstore. No, it was like Antifa Coalition of Bookstore and Coffee.
It's actually so
it
was a set, but it was like the shirt was kind of like it was
Were you never welcome to see?
get out into the world. I'm really like that right now. Right? Yeah. Plus, I'm from West Virginia, so literally I did in that area. I mean, I traveled in that area. I couldn't know, but they wouldn't let me go outside and take one minute when I had plans. You know, that's what it says. I think somebody I get over here and are you okay, so I like happening university. So this school that just had a child there, 2 months left on there.
Thank you so much, Paula.
It has like every saying like when things are fucking great. Sophia. Like I might like sign it. Like it's nice right. And then like I can hear if it's not I'm wearing like that holds everything. It's incredibly heavy. Oh yes. You have to be
like I was, it was, yeah. And now it's
It's okay that I
sure.
Because I'll be
Yeah.
We have like 15 minutes. So I'm supposed to start.
But we still kind of like let's do that. But so she's brings very much like the other side and it's like we still have all the classes and then we have similar like honestly, I can't she's so and like I think she's yeah, they were always put out one kind of thing and then there was that was I don't they're all like which is only like 4 weeks. They've changed the name like 4 years. Okay, that's so it's been like public policy has like political economy. Now it's more political stance. I do, and yeah, he's so good. He's so funny. He's so that's already my major. You don't need to talk to me. I'm on your side. Yeah, no, I'm pretty good with it. Okay, yeah. I know. He's the chairman. Outgoing chairman for it. I only have 2 years. So 1 year left. I did full enrollment. I didn't do enrollment. So I've already done 1 year behind before. No, that's fair. I was just like, so my plan is like 18 years. I turned 19. I graduated. I turned 19 next month, and then I'll graduate at 19. So I must have said we're going to Greece. We're going to Greece in like January. And that way I can still like start traveling. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know everyone here is on this, right? That's why I realized yeah. So I started taking classes this summer, and then I would take 3 to 4 classes summer and fall. So I graduated. And then everything but math. And now I'm so college. I'm like meeting people that are like 7 years. Why did I go to high school? There was one dude who was a grade above me. It was kind of like he's like the trailblazer for public school, and then I'm doing it for craft. So now we're like the we're now doing it. And my brother's smaller than I I want to say yeah. I grew up also, like I do like we got it a lot of people on there, so it's brand new, and it's like and it's surrounded by like like honestly, I feel like all of you silly. Like stand up and your community is yeah, I don't think it's
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca George, a junior at Hillsdale College studying politics and an intern at the Luce Center. I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, who is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and has published several articles in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, and the Washington Post. She consistently contributes to the National Review, where she writes articles on feminism, the sexual revolution, and pro-life advocacy. Her co-authored book titled Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing explains the depths at which abortion has impacted our society. Her passion for the pro-life movement inspires her remarks today. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra DeSanctis Marr.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here. I'm really grateful for the chance to be with you this morning. I've been giving talks about abortion and the pro-life movement for several years now. Oh, are we good? Okay. For most of that time, my talks focused a lot on Roe v. Wade and how we can make progress as pro-lifers with Roe v. Wade in place. And I'm so grateful that finally today I can give a different talk. For the last couple of years, I've been able to give a very different talk because Roe is finally gone. So as I'm sure all of you know, we're at this really remarkable moment in the history of the pro-life movement. After half a century, the Supreme Court finally got rid of one of the most unjust decisions in our country's history. The court rightly recognized that the Constitution never protected any right to abortion, and the court finally allowed the people and their elected representatives in every state across the country to begin protecting unborn children from the violence of abortion. This was a major victory. It was about 2 years ago, almost exactly. But as we've seen over these past 2 years, I think we know that victory was not the end of our work as pro-lifers. It was not the end of the work to end abortion. So here are the two main things I want to focus on for all of you this morning. Number one, what should the pro-life movement be doing now that we live in a post-Roe v. Wade America? And how should all of you as young women who are interested in and involved in politics think about our role as pro-lifers? And I want to speak specifically to how the pro-life movement can find success in this very different political, cultural situation we now find ourselves in. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the past 2 years is a lot of losses, frankly, for pro-lifers, which we can talk about more in the Q&A if you'd like. But we've also seen a lot of politicians, including those who describe themselves as pro-life, trying to distance themselves from the pro-life movement. A lot of people would like us to believe that being pro-life is politically toxic. So what I want to leave you with today is that nothing could be further from the case. Being pro-life is actually where most Americans are. That's not the message that we get, but that's really the reality. And in my opinion, in this new political, legal, cultural context created by Dobbs, it's essential that we have a strong, vocal, unapologetic pro-life stance. So I want to explain a bit more about what that looks like and how we as conservative women can help to develop that kind of pro-life witness. Because I think if you look at the pro-life movement, of course, there are strong pro-life men, but it's really women who drive the pro-life movement. That's always been the case, and it always will be. So in the 2 years since Dobbs, especially for those of you who follow this issue, I think you'll realize what we've seen is commentators, politicians on both sides of the aisle make the claim that conservative election losses have been, at least in part, the fault of Dobbs and the Republican Party's position on abortion. This is now a pretty common argument. They argue that Republicans are seen as too pro-life and that this has become politically costly. Maybe we should just kind of set aside this issue, stop talking about it, and move on. I think this is a highly misguided view, obviously on principle, but also in fact, that's just not the reality. And I think it's essential for us as pro-lifers to realize and be able to explain that being pro-life is not an electoral liability. So if you look back at the 2022 midterms, a huge number of really vocally, actively pro-life politicians won re-election by huge margins. If you look at states like Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Texas, Oklahoma, sitting governors signed really pro-life laws, and they were reelected. So meanwhile, other Republicans in the same states were defeated. I don't think those results would make very much sense if the midterm results were somehow a backlash to Dobbs or pro-life laws or the pro-life position. Instead, I think what we saw in 2022 was that there was a lot more at play for voters than simply reacting to Dobbs or the pro-life stance. I think they actually suggest, if you look at really every single race, that the most vocal, the most active pro-life candidates actually had a major advantage. So in my view, I think it's really clear the problem that we have on abortion, if there is a problem, is a messaging issue and not an issue with the heart of the pro-life position. I'll come back to why I think that's significant in just a moment. The second main point I think we have to keep in mind as pro-lifers, and especially as pro-life women, is that American views on abortion are really complex. There's kind of this narrative, I think, in the media and particularly on social media that everybody, particularly all women, are just pro-abortion. We all kind of accept that this is the reality. Abortion is great. That's not true. If you look at the data, the overwhelming number of Americans are actually really much closer to the pro-life position on abortion than they are to the pro-abortion position. Most Americans actually really would like to protect unborn children throughout most of pregnancy. Sorry, very thirsty this morning, apparently. So I'm going to give you just a couple key data points to keep in mind on this, and then I'll tell you what we can make of that. So first, public opinion surveys consistently suggest that a huge majority of Americans wants to protect unborn children from abortion throughout most of pregnancy. More specifically, there's this annual poll of Americans' views comes out every January, and it's shown for many years in a row now that about 3/4 of Americans either want abortion to be totally illegal, want it to be legal only in very rare cases, like if, in cases of rape or if a mother's life is at risk, or to be legal only during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Okay, so that's about 3/4 of Americans, right? How often do you hear people talking about that statistic? Second, almost nobody in America supports allowing abortion until birth. Gallup polls, for example, have found that just 10% of Americans support that position, and just 18% of people who describe themselves as Democrats support that position. Okay, so almost nobody in America thinks that abortion should be legal throughout all of pregnancy. What do these numbers tell us? I think they tell us, again, that as a political matter, as a cultural matter, most Americans are a lot closer to the pro-life position than the media or politicians or the culture would have us believe. Meanwhile, probably many of you are familiar with this, but let's just run through what the progressive position on abortion is. Number one, abortion should be legal for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason up until birth. Abortion should be fully paid for by the taxpayer. The federal government should prevent states from enacting any pro-life laws, including laws that kind of regulate the health and safety at abortion clinics for women, or laws that prohibit abortions chosen on the basis of disability or a child's race or sex. They argue that doctors should be legally required to perform abortions, even if it violates their religious or moral beliefs. And they believe that doctors should not be required to care for newborn babies who survive an abortion procedure. These are highly extreme positions, right? This is really crazy stuff, and none of them is popular with most Americans. Again, most of them are not even popular with most people who call themselves Democrats. Meanwhile, we as pro-lifers obviously would like to protect unborn children throughout all of pregnancy. We know that every human being has the right to life from the moment of conception. But at the same time, pro-lifers are by and large willing to accept the best laws we can get, whatever policies we can get to protect unborn children right now, even as we keep working to change culture, change hearts and minds so we can get more protective laws down the road. In other words, pro-lifers are usually open to incrementalism. We're open to supporting laws that might not be perfect, but that are at least kind of better than abortion on demand or better than what we have right now. We've seen that since Dobbs, right? We're willing to pass laws today that most Americans can get behind. So this is a really advantageous position to be in. We're willing to kind of meet Americans where they are and help them to see the pro-life issue from our point of view more and more over time. In contrast to that, progressives are not open to incrementalism. They are not okay with any moderation on this issue whatsoever. They're fully committed to that little platform that I just gave you, this very extreme stance. They're not even willing to let voters in the state set their own policy on this issue. They're not even willing to support laws requiring medical care for newborns who survive abortion. That's how extreme this is. So what does this all mean for you as pro-life young women looking ahead to this really kind of brave new world of the fight against abortion? I think what it means is we have this major opening to win over the hearts and minds of our fellow Americans who are actually a lot more open to our perspective than we might think. I've come to believe actually that most Americans are closer to our position on abortion than they think they are. And that confusion is because the other side is so effective at convincing them that we as pro-lifers are the extremists rather than the other way around. And I think oftentimes we don't do enough to counter that narrative. We know, unfortunately, that abortion supporters will pretty much say anything they need to say to get the mainstream media on their side and to get away with kind of camouflaging the extremism of their position. And we've seen a lot of times that the maybe most prominent voices on our side of this topic are not always the most effective or the most vocal about speaking about abortion in a way that wins over voters. It's kind of helpful, I think, sometimes to think about the abortion debate like this big vacuum where most Americans are sort of on the sidelines. They're not sure what they think. They're not so sure really about even all the facts of the issue. They're just trying to make up their mind. And on one side, you have the most vocal abortion supporters just kind of filling that vacuum with all kinds of lies, claiming pro-lifers hate women, claiming pro-life laws aren't going to allow pregnant mothers to get health care, claiming unborn children are clumps of cells or parasites or other arguments like that I'm sure you've all heard. And on the other side, oftentimes, again, the most prominent pro-lifers, particularly in politics, don't really say much at all about the issue. They won't step into that vacuum in the first place. It's almost like they hope that kind of not talking about it and ignoring abortion will just kind of make the issue go away. And as a result, this kind of gives the pro-abortion side free reign and the media free reign to lie about the pro-life position. And we don't get to make a proud, compelling, compassionate case for what we believe. And I think it's because a lot of people fear that we'll be characterized as anti-woman. I think that's why it's so important for everyone in this room to know how to speak confidently about this issue, right? To be able to explain why being pro-life is not anti-woman, in fact, quite the opposite. But things being what they are, I think that silence often leaves this big opening for abortion supporters to define us as the bad guys. And we have every reason to think Americans are going to believe those lies if we don't figure out a way to counter them. So where does that leave us here? I want to close by talking just a bit about my book, and I'm happy to talk about it more in Q&A if you'd like. But I think the argument of my book, which came out exactly 2 years ago to the day, which is kind of cool, I think it might give you all some insight into how you can sort of speak to this issue in your personal conversations or in whatever work you do. So our book came out just a couple of days after the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs. We wrote it in like 3 months leading up to the decision, and we obviously didn't know how the case was going to go, but we were hoping it would be decided in our favor, and we wanted our book to be kind of a roadmap for the pro-life movement. So what we argue is that in a post-Roe v. Wade America, we as pro-lifers need to learn a new way of speaking about abortion, particularly in order to win over our fellow Americans. And the root of our argument is that abortion has harmed our entire society, not just the unborn child. And that pro-lifers have to learn how to make that argument in order to change not only law, but especially culture, and to build a more pro-life country. I'm sure pretty much everyone in this room, or most of us, knows how to explain abortion is wrong because it kills an innocent unborn child. We know, I think as conservatives, we all kind of learn that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and that we have inherent dignity and value from the moment of conception. This is, of course, an essential argument, right? We have to know how to explain this. It's the most fundamental way to explain how abortion is wrong. But unfortunately, the reality is many Americans have heard this argument. Most Americans have heard this argument by now. And a lot of people are not convinced by it. So our book argues we have to go beyond this argument. And we have to learn how to explain that abortion has harmed our entire society. People who support abortion, you don't usually hear people say, oh yeah, it kills an unborn child. Isn't that wonderful, right? How many people here have heard someone say that? That's not the argument. Instead, they usually argue that abortion has been good for our society. And particularly, they argue that it's good or necessary for women. They tend to argue that women need abortion in order to be free and equal to men. So our book explains why instead of helping women, abortion has actually harmed them, physically, psychologically, culturally, and how it actually has not only harmed specific women, but has helped to create a deeply anti-woman culture. We also explain how legal abortion has harmed our politics, our legal system, the medical profession, right? Redefining something that kills a human being as healthcare, and every aspect of our culture. So I think this type of argument is actually the best way for us as pro-lifers, and especially as pro-life women, to talk about the harm that abortion has done, right? To talk about not just the way the unborn child has been harmed, but the way every woman is harmed by abortion. We know that this is a grave moral evil, but that harm really does go beyond taking the life of the unborn child. This is kind of a crazy thing to think, but in reality, every abortionist is harmed by abortion, right? Everyone involved in it is touched by that evil. So I think learning to speak about abortion in these ways is not only the best path to legal victory or even political victory, but most important, I think it's the best way to reach hearts and minds and to kind of speak to the people around us about this issue. So I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take the discussion anywhere you want with Q&A.
We'll take any questions now.
Hi, good morning, and congrats on your 2 years anniversary.
Thank you.
My name is Paula. I'm actually from Paraguay, South America. Just clarifying that. I'm an intern as a research policy competitive enterprise institute, and also I'm finishing a master's in George Washington University.
Great.
So in my country, we don't talk about these issues because we are a very Christian country, and we think that this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So but all the world sees this as a sin, and also shouldn't even be allowed to talk in the Senate or Congress, and it's just never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Why the message of their side, like the left side, is so effective in their view, and are they just louder or
Here, you mean?
Yes, in America, because I don't see anything like this only here or Europe. So why are they so special with the message? Like, what makes them communicate their goal such a special way that we can?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things going on. The first thing is, in the U.S., you have to think about the context of Roe v. Wade. So pretty much before this issue could be settled, before we could, abortion hasn't really been around in a really prominent cultural way for that long, right? Women haven't been getting abortions in this kind of systemic way forever. It's really only been the last 50, 70 to 50 years, something like that, that it's really been something women have been seeking. And pretty much at the start of our debate over what our laws should be, over whether this was moral, the Supreme Court just came in, took the issue away from the political process, shut down the political debate, and just unilaterally made abortion completely legal everywhere. And there was nothing we could do about it. And so obviously that was unfair for a lot of reasons, not least of which was that that's wrong constitutionally. But to your question, it created this sort of sense in the US that, well, that's the position now, right? That's what we think in America. And so it changed the terms of debate. So the other side could always just point to Roe and say, well, this is American law. This is what our Constitution says. Pro-lifers have to go away. That's the end of it. And so they kind of had, pro-lifers have been fighting this battle with one arm tied behind our back, essentially, since Roe. And so it really created the cultural and legal conditions for the other side to sound like they had the upper hand, in other words. And then I think on top of that, probably the second reason would be the media, unfortunately, is really full of people who agree with the other side. Either they don't know the issue very well, or they sympathize with the pro-abortion side. And so they really, if you read articles on this topic, you're not going to find the reality of what's going on with pro-life policy or with abortion, or even like the idea that abortion harms women. You're never going to find that actual argument in any major publication. So it's another way in which we're fighting with an arm tied behind our back. So kind of two arms tied behind our back, and we're at a major disadvantage. So that's probably there's more to it than that, but those would be the two big reasons.
Hi, my name is Sarah Murley. I go to school at Patrick Henry College, and I'm currently interning at Concerned Women for America in Alexandria. First off, I wanted to thank you for writing your book with Ryan Anderson. I actually interviewed Ryan Anderson about his book, his and your book.
That's great.
For the Anchoring Truth podcast like 2 years ago, and it was just so enlightening to me. And
thanks.
I'm so happy to have you here. My question is, how did you establish yourself as a pro-life journalist? Did you was that beat sort of like thrust onto you? Did you choose it?
Yeah.
And any advice to share for other people who want to be journalists?
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't really go into journalism thinking that this was going to be what I'd write about all the time. It's always been an issue that I've cared about a lot, kind of personally. I've always been pro-life and felt like I kind of had a responsibility to do something about this issue, but I started my career at National Review. I didn't show up on day one saying like, I'm going to be the abortion guy. Like that'd be kind of freaky, right? But the way it works at National Review, and I think at most publications, if you're going into journalism, when you're younger, you can't just show up and write about, the number one news item of the day. Like you kind of have to figure out a little niche to carve out for yourself where, particularly in opinion journalism, where you are the one talking about something that no one else is talking about. And at the time, abortion was definitely not as much in the news as it is now. I mean, it's always been kind of an issue that people talk about, but nothing like it has been the last 3 or so years because of Dobbs. And so I found that a lot of the kind of smaller stories on this issue weren't being covered by other people at National Review. My editors were happy to let me do it. And to your question about advice for people involved in journalism, I think it's really important as young people to develop expertise, right? Don't show up and start just saying your opinion about everything because nobody cares, frankly. People still don't care about my opinion. They care about what's true. And so my opinion, if I write opinion journalism, I'm still sharing facts. And then I'm sharing kind of my analysis or what people should think, but it's grounded in what I know about the issue. And so I really started writing about this because I wanted to develop expertise in something and be kind of a go-to source on a particular topic and make myself more valuable to the place I was working. So long story short, I basically just kind of wrote about it more. And the more I wrote about it, the more I learned and the more people wanted me to write about it and speak about it. And then ended up writing a book. And in some ways, I kind of feel like it all happened to me and I'm still not quite sure how, but that's, I guess, the long and short of it. Just develop expertise. And if you can do it in things that you find interesting and that you're passionate about, even better. Am I supposed to call on people or are you guys handling it? You got it. Okay. Good, great.
Hi, my name is Kate Caprosi. I am a junior political science and economics major at Clemson University, and I'm interning with Congressman Max Miller this summer.
Great.
I loved your point that pro-lifers are still pro-women, and I think that message can get lost a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So leading with that message, I wanted your opinion on how, a lot of the argument on the opposite side is that banning abortion doesn't completely stop abortion, or it just stops safe abortion. How do you kind of keep with that pro-women message when, if abortion is completely legal or illegal, women are still choosing to do unsafe and illegal abortions? How do you stick with that pro-women message? If that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple good responses to that. The first thing is that there's no such thing as a safe abortion for two reasons. Every abortion kills an unborn child, and that's not good for women. And secondly, even legal abortions are dangerous for women physically and psychologically. So if you get a copy of our book, you can find this information elsewhere, but we collect in our second chapter. I think we have more than 100 footnotes in that chapter going through the long-term physical, short-term physical side effects of abortion, safe legal abortion, right? The long-term psychological complications for many, many women. We just don't hear about this in the media, but abortion is not this like, go get a tooth pulled and prance home kind of thing. So it's not as though keeping it legal is making this great and safe and wonderful for women. But then secondly, I think if you look at countries where abortion has been made illegal, you don't find some kind of swath of women, dying in back alleys or something like that. By and large, the number of women seeking abortions does drop very steeply when abortion is illegal. And, you can do what you can to try and, protect women from essentially dangerous back alley abortionists, but it doesn't make women safer to keep abortion legal at a broad scale. The fact that people are going to do illegal things doesn't make law right or wrong and doesn't make women better off. So I'd put it kind of like that. And I'd encourage you, I've written some articles on this if you Google it or check out our book if you want some more kind of footnotes and statistics to offer people on that.
Hello, I'm Isela. I go to Biola University. I was wondering what your opinions were about President Trump's comments last night's debate on abortion.
I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
I think I'll just speak broadly, not specifically about necessarily his comments, but I think in general, it's not the case that the Dobbs decision just sent the abortion issue back to the states and only the states. It's not the case that pro-lifers have only ever wanted abortion to be a state issue. Pro-lifers have always wanted pro-life laws at the federal level and at the state level. And the Supreme Court decision on chemical abortion in particular was a decision based on standing. It was not a decision about chemical abortion drugs in particular. All it decided was that the people who brought the case didn't have grounds to be the people bringing that type of case. That's all the decision said. So the Supreme Court has not weighed in one way or another on whether chemical abortion can be regulated, whether it's legal, et cetera. And a very little known fact, there's federal law making it illegal to mail chemical abortion drugs. And that law simply is not being enforced by the Biden administration. So the issue, I would say, is a lot more complicated than it maybe was discussed last night and than it often appears in the media. And as a broad matter, I think politicians who would like to be elected by pro-life people should have pro-life positions. I'll just leave it at that.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I go to the University of Alabama, and this summer I'm interning with Young America's Foundation.
Great.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about IVF because it seems that a lot of people in the pro-life movement are speaking more about IVF. It's becoming more relevant as it's becoming more common. But different people in the pro-life position are taking very different stances on IVF.
Yeah.
So is this a problem that we should embrace to solve in the pro-life movement, or put it off like for the sake of unity in the movement?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I would say a couple things. I think IVF very naturally fits under the pro-life umbrella simply because there's, human beings that are conceived and frozen out there as a result of this procedure. As a result of the procedure, there's babies who are conceived and then killed. So it's very obviously part of the pro-life umbrella. What that means about what we should focus on politically is a separate question from that, right? So I think we've bitten off plenty more than we can chew at the moment, just simply focusing on trying to have a more pro-life culture when it comes to abortion. So that's not to say we can't speak about IVF at all, but just, having some kind of political crusade to get rid of it right now, I don't know, that's the most politically prudent thing to be doing as pro-lifers. But I think it's perfectly consistent to always say, look, this is not a pro-life procedure. There also are talk about, harming our whole society. There's a lot of ramifications to IVF for women. It's not like some wonderful, healthy, great solution for everybody. And of course, always speak compassionately about the fact that a lot of people have a hard time having children. There's a reason why people are drawn to IVF, and it makes sense. But to be consistently pro-life, there are parts of the way that's done that are not okay. And that's, I think it's fine to talk about that as pro-lifers, even if we don't necessarily kind of rush into a political fight over that right now. So I put it like that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can end if no one has any more questions. Okay, let's thank Alexandra one more.
All right, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the work you do in the pro-life movement. So we'll do pictures now, we'll do pictures now. So if everyone wants to line up again on the wall, that's okay, perfect. So yeah, if everyone wants to line up again on the wall, if you want a picture with Catherine, and then after that we will go into lunch. So we have a buffet set up on the back table. So whenever you're ready, you can go and get food, and yeah.
is Lucy Spence. I'm a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm an intern for the Luce Center this summer. And I'm thrilled to announce and introduce our next speaker today. Catherine Pakaluk is an associate professor of economics and social research at the Catholic University of America, where she serves as director of the social research academic area. Formerly, she was associate professor and chair of the economics department at Ave Maria University. Dr. Pakaluk holds a PhD in economics from Harvard University, where she studied under Nobel laureate Oliver Hart. Her areas of research include the economics of education and religion, Catholic social thought, political economy, and family studies. She is the author of her recent book, Hannah's Children, The Woman Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth, an examination of American women.
Good morning. Afternoon. It's great to see everybody here, and it's a really great way to spend the final days of June. Yeah, everybody's summer is my favorite time of year. Everybody knows this. In the minute we hit the equinox, I get a little sad that like summer is already winding down, right? Where it's like end of June, but that's my favorite time of year. I'm also so delighted to be here because Kimberly Begg is a good friend and somebody whose work I admired deeply before she took the helm here. And this is just the beginning, so I'm very excited to see what this institution develops into. This is a moment where, this is not my remarks, are not prepared to talk about this, but there's a moment right now where conservative women are really asking a lot of hard questions. So I think I'm just delighted to see all of you and to know all of you. And I see a couple of faces that I already know, so that's really wonderful. But with apologies to my students who are sick of hearing me. So anyway, so my remarks today are titled, How to Have a Family, 8 Lessons from America's Hannahs. And hopefully this will become clear to you as I go along. So there's a piece of the story of growing up female in America, right? That's like, you can be and do anything, Danielle told me. I'm going to tell you about Danielle today. But before that, if there's a piece of the story of growing up in America that's like, you can be and do anything, can you have a family? That's the question. So data for last year, 2023, says that a typical woman in America will have about 1.6 children in her lifetime. That number is catastrophic for a country, and America is not alone with low birth rates. But it's also catastrophic for women your age. When we survey women at your age, most of them say they would like to have more children, at least 2 or 3. So what gives? Why are women failing to have the families that they want to have? It's not a simple question. Is having children just too hard or too expensive? If you can be and do anything, why can't you have the family that you want to have? To find out, I traveled around the country talking to women who have defied the odds and had the families that they wanted. And why not? If you want to find out about getting fit, talk to people who are fit, right? Don't take the word of people who can't get in shape. Their stories taught me that falling birth rates are not a cost problem, at least not the way we normally think about a cost problem. The real obstacle to choosing a child, they said, was the cost of missing out on other things you could have done with your time or with your life. The price that they really leaned into, the cost of having children, was what they had to give up. They talked about sleepless nights, about giving up comforts and plans and hobbies, status, a clean house, giving up alone time, achievements, freedom, giving up meeting your own needs. Having children and parenting is all about living for someone else, one mom said, and not for yourself. These costs they granted were big and consequential, but the reason for missing out, their purpose, was so much bigger than the losses. They would give up something of themselves, but their children would give it back to them with interest. It's the paradox of the cross, one woman told me. They had a reason to have children big enough to give up their lives more than once, and that reason came from deep trust in God, from love for their spouses, or love for their children, and often all 3. And anyway, they said, the losses weren't the end of the story. Their children were their greatest blessings. They told me how their children had saved their lives, saved their marriages, and saved their souls. They, by their own reports, have been saved from immaturity, loneliness, selfishness, and uselessness. And so had their children and their husbands. They told stories of healing and growth. The upshot of all of this, they believed the nation would be happier and more virtuous if we spent more of our adult lives taking care of children, and if our children grew up with more siblings. Their stories taught me that having a family is possible today, very much so. They didn't seem to face different trade-offs. They didn't drop out of college. They didn't think that having children was easy, but they wanted children enough to overcome the costs and quietly arrange their lives to welcome them. Like the biblical Hannah, who prayed to be relieved of barrenness and was blessed with Samuel and later with 5 more children, America's Hannahs believe children are blessings, expressions of God's goodness, and the purpose of their marriages. What life lessons can we take from their stories? So I'm really going to tell you more about Danielle, who said about how it is growing up in America as a female. We met her on a hot summer day in her home outside of Denver. She told me that she met her husband on the first day of medical school. She said, we were in the same study carrel and part of the same campus ministry. She and her MD, PhD husband completed medical school together, and she went on to finish her medical residency in pediatrics at a major medical center in Texas. She really loved to talk, and she told us it's a big part of her marriage. She said, we met as, academic peers, and then with our training, he became an attending physician. And I really took this sharp turn from medicine to staying home. It's really nice to have this life. We talk about all kinds of things all the time. He's very interesting and interested in a lot of things. So I find that even with a lot of kids, we're still talking about stuff related to his interests and mine, related to ethics and things in philosophy. The great thing about philosophy, she said, is it undergirds everything. So you're sort of always talking about things that are happening. And for us, it's great, she said. Maybe our ability to ignore the tasks and talk is helpful. She went on, he's a great dad, but he's not necessarily someone that when I met him, I thought, this guy is going to be like champion dad. But it turns out he's a great guy and he just shows up for what's going on. And in our world, it's been kids, and he's just great. He's super engaged and helpful. And I would say pretty egalitarian in many ways, and sort of just doing what needs to be done, and sometimes doing the things I hate to do. Describing her partnership with her husband, Danielle said, I think one of the great gifts of having a lot of kids is that you have to be sort of on a mission together. And that's not necessarily true in some marriages, right? For us, it has been. We've really had to pull together to make the world go round. So lesson number 1 from America's Hannahs, and you might think this is an odd lesson to put first. Children save your marriage. If you want a rock-solid marriage, find a man who wants children as much as you do. Your family mission, having children, will sustain your marriage in tough times because the marriage won't be about you. It will be about them. Now, how did 2 doctors who met and fell in love in medical school end up with so many kids? Danielle and her husband didn't set out to have a large family. She more skidded into full-time motherhood. She said, I really loved medical school, but when I did residency, it was fairly devastating. I developed horrible anxiety and I hated it. And so when I finished, I was thankful to be done. I planned to take a year off and start my fellowship at the Children's Hospital. And so I planned to just take a year off with my son. And then by about December of the year that he was born, pay attention, I realized it was the first time in my life that I hadn't just gone from one thing to the next. I came up for air and I realized I don't want to keep doing this. Having her son gave her the breathing room to figure out she didn't love medicine. She said, and I really, really didn't want to keep doing it. It wasn't something where I said, well, I don't want to do the fellowship, but I'd be happy to work in primary care or something. I just really wanted nothing to do with practicing medicine. So at that point, I just became sort of a surprise, full-time stay-at-home mom. And then I just, I enjoyed my son. I enjoyed being his mom in a lot of ways. So she had this surprise encounter with a new kind of joy, the enjoyment of her son, and then her daughter, and then of having more children, and some reason to stop. She said, it sort of sounds ridiculous in terms of planning. We just sort of kept liking the kids that we were having and liking having kids and enjoying their little years. I think there was some degree to which we kind of thought, well, the kids are little, so if we're going to have more like this, they should probably be close. And then I don't know when it tipped over from that sort of having them close together to sort of like, gosh, there's a lot of them. But it was certainly not our plan, she said. No romantic candlelight dinner sketching out our plan with 7 children. We would have been the most shocked probably. Now I'm like, well, this is what I'm doing all the time anyway. And so there's no like impetus not to have more. So lesson number 2 from America's Hannah's: childbearing is always a cost-benefit decision, but the costs and the benefits aren't monetary. So keeping the door open to having children allows for a reassessment of the costs and benefits along the way. Okay, so what does that exactly mean? Danielle's language of no impetus not to have more, right? I'm doing this all the time anyway. It echoed a language of openness that we heard across our travels, like all the women we met at different forms. These moms didn't have a grand vision for how many kids they wanted, but the door wasn't closed. Even if the next baby wasn't imagined yet or even wanted. The openness allowed for reassessment of costs and benefits at later stages of their families. And I'll say something about this in a minute, but just to pause for a second. Maybe at your age, you think this is bizarre to talk about openness. You don't know how many times you will get the question once you've had one child, are you done yet? Right? Done is like the big buzzword. You'll be at the playground with your 2 kids. Are you done? And it's so baffling if you're not going to ever sort of close the door. Even if you think, well, I'm not planning another one, door isn't closed, but why are people obsessed with whether you're done? Anyway, so this was the very key thing we heard from all these women. They weren't done. They didn't permanently close the door. So she said, Danielle said, I do think we sort of crossed that point where I'm thinking, if we're going to have 1 or 2 more kids, is that going to be a game changer for everybody at this point? I don't think so. And I think I would be open to that. And in some ways, it feels easier to be open to that now than at other inflection points. Danielle explained that with more children, the lifestyle cost of an additional child becomes smaller. It's just easier to do. Your life is already rearranged. Having 1 or 2 more kids won't be a game changer. In the old days, before now, in the old days, couples started out when they got married, having kids. Family planning in the old days meant deciding when to stop having kids. That's just how it worked. When you got married, you started having kids. But beginning in the 1960s, this all changed. Couples started marriage postponing children. It's the norm today, and you probably know this. It may be your older siblings, maybe friends of yours, they get married, and then they're going to have their time. They're going to wait and figure out the best time to have children. So family planning today means deciding when to start having children. There's no longer timed with marriage. But if the cost of starting a family, of switching your fertility on, get that first kid in there, it's a lot higher than the cost of those extra kids down the line. That's the hardest one to have. Then the change from when to stop having kids to when to start, right? You have to decide when to opt in. That could be monumental. Marriages aren't open to children in general anymore, not even at the beginning. America's Hannahs, I found, rejected that approach, sometimes intentionally and sometimes by accident, like Danielle. They didn't bookend their childbearing into a phase, are you done yet? But they kept the door open, again, sometimes accidentally and sometimes on purpose. And this openness made it easier to have the children they hope to have because the costs and benefits of childbearing aren't the same at every stage of motherhood. The women talked about the enormity of the personal and domestic adjustments called for by having a first, and they insisted that second and third babies were almost as hard, but it didn't keep getting harder. There was a peak cost in terms of the challenges of having children. 3 is the hardest number of children to have, one mom said. The women in our study had a general sense that after 2 or 3 additional children were much easier to have. If we're going to have 1 or 2 more kids, Danielle said, is that going to be a game changer? I don't think so. Besides eating out, Danielle mentioned the size of her car and traveling less. Since they'd already made those adjustments, having 1 or 2 more wouldn't impact their lifestyle. And they expected to enjoy 1 or 2 more a great deal, since there would be more people to enjoy, right, to share the joy. So a particular type of cost-benefit reasoning started to argue in favor of the additional child for many of the women in our study. The fixed costs, such as giving up a career or modifying your career, or giving up second income or getting a bigger car, had already been borne. And the personal and lifestyle related costs became smaller, and the expected value to the family seemed to grow larger with additional children. So lesson number three, costs go down, the personal costs go down, and the benefits go up. Children get easier to have after the first ones, not harder, and they bring more joy. So have the first one as soon as you can. Don't get married and wait for ages and ages to have kids. Danielle saw it, the way Danielle saw it, the lifestyle costs of starting a family had to be seen as an investment or a down payment on a certain kind of growth. She said, I think the transition from not having kids at all to having kids is so profound, because you go from being responsible for only yourself to being responsible for another helpless person. It really, it's such a dramatic change in your capacity to do the kinds of things that you're used to doing. I remember thinking, my life is over. Like, I'll never even be able to take a shower again. And that wasn't true, but that's what I thought for a couple weeks. She says, the gear shifts so dramatically there. I think it's easy to feel like that with the first one. And even sometimes the second can do this too, because you think, well, with your first child, you're like, well, my whole world changed. But you also get used to doing everything that you wanted for that child. And the second one is where you have to learn you can't do everything that you want for everybody. And past that point, well, the dynamic shifts a little bit. And there's always that joke about going from, man-to-man defense to zone defense. It just keeps changing. Danielle's experience was that children, especially the first few, change your world by requiring more than your capacity. And when the first kid comes, you can't do everything for yourself that you're used to doing. And when the second one comes, you can't do everything for the first that you're used to doing. So each additional child challenges you to adapt to a more complicated set of needs. You grow, but as you grow, your limitations allow others to grow, like your other children. She continued, my experience has been that having kids has meant, by definition, I can't make everything be the way that I want it to be. But I think it's good for them, my children, in the sense that it liberates their play, their creativity, their responsibility. All of those things are somewhat elevated because of their circumstances. Anyone following the work of Jonathan Haidt on how children are overparented today, right? If only there were a way to sort of naturally not overparent. Right, so this is exactly what she's talking about. She explained that when mom can't do everything for everyone anymore, it gives rise to a type of freedom for children. They can recreate without being overparented, and it gives rise to an opportunity for kids to feel needed and valuable. Older kids become part of the nexus of caregiving in the family. So she rejected the idea that each child is a new burden. So this is important. To say that it's additive, she said, in that each child just takes more and more and more away from you, doesn't take into account the relationship between children themselves, and it doesn't take into account the way that the wisdom you glean over time from parenting changes the way that you parent subsequent children. Younger children aren't left with less of you because you become more, and your nurturing as a mother is extended through your children. But she asked, does it cost you something? Well, yes, but the dividends are there too. She said there's a piece of sacrifice. There's a good thing in that. It's a gift to have people to care for. So lesson number 4, if you're still following, children add, they do not subtract. They make us more and they make our children more. There's a whole separate conversation about how they make our husbands more, but that's too much time for today. They add, they don't subtract. Danielle stressed that the choice to mother many wasn't so much of a loss as a new direction. Is there less of me, she said, in the sense that things have changed in terms of interests? Sure. If I just woke up tomorrow and it was just me and it was sort of just whatever you would like to do, I'd go to church on time and then I would go to an art museum and eat at a restaurant, and so things change. And this is super interesting. My husband and I have talked about this a lot, she said. We talked about this in medicine. When you make one decision, other things die. They just do. And when we decided to become doctors, other parts of our lives died. And anytime you make a decision to do something, particularly something that is somewhat consuming, yes, other things will die. Like having a big family. Well, are there parts of my life before that I don't invest in or engage in like I once did? Sure. But I'm doing something else. It's me parenting, shepherding, nurturing, teaching, and fostering the growth of these people. But that's not bad. I mean, because you could look at anybody's vocation and say like, oh, well, you're no longer sleeping in until noon because you have a job now. You wouldn't say like, oh, you've lost yourself, right? Her language, Other Things Die, captures the notion of what economists call opportunity cost very well. Mothering full-time was more valuable to her than what she was giving up. It wasn't a choice against professional work, but her professional work was a good that had died in this case. Not only that, but also eating at restaurants and going to museums on a Sunday, also going to Mass on time. Actually, she wasn't Catholic. It wouldn't have been Mass. It was church. All goods, but not the goods that had the highest value for her family. Okay, lesson number 5. Trying to sum that up. Lesson number 5 is you pay for children with what you give up. Other things die, parts of you die, and that's okay. It's not so much cost affordability or monetary affordability, but it's lifestyle and identity affordability. So to think about that clearly, Danielle suggested that the narrative about losing your identity, you're going to lose yourself, might come from a culture that doesn't treasure motherhood as highly as other things. And so she explained, I think maybe some of that is rooted in like not meriting the work of parenting richly enough. And of course, it turns into a whole minefield because of course there are people doing paid vocational work that is wonderful and are also mothering. And so it can get kind of hard when you talk about it. And certainly it's culturally sensitive. There was a book about caregiving, she told me, and it talked about how we would benefit from dignifying the work of caregiving as adult valuable work and how it could be across the board, could be neighboring, caring for the elderly, caring for children. But it's become sort of like anyone could do it, which now it's okay. But to raise the value of it, I think pushes back against this idea. I mean, if you're saying like, I'm developing my skill set as a parent, you know, okay, she was fumbling around this, but her idea was that the notion of mothering isn't just a state of being. Like, it's not just now you're a mom. It's also a practice with definite skills and habits and expertise. Mothers who dedicate themselves to mothering can grow as mothers in the virtues of motherhood. Danielle worried about the logic of seeing mothering as essentially unskilled labor. It would follow, she argued, that caregiving isn't worth dedicating your life to. In contrast, if it's more like one of the great pursuits of human life, like summiting a high peak, well, then the grueling practice and the hardship of preparation would be undertaken with a view to the worthiness of the goal, right? It costs you something, she said, but the dividends are there too. She observed that attitudes towards family commitments seemed cooler compared to attitudes towards being in a demanding medical residency. She said, maybe it's unfair to accuse people, but I feel that there's sort of an implicit notion, like when you have a lot of kids, like, well, if things are busy, you asked for it, which is a really interesting contrast to the years of residency, which I also asked for, and which I also made decisions surrounding. But it was always, I felt that the overarching vibe was empathy or more affirmation, like, yeah, medicine, it's like amazing. That's so cool that you're doing this. It was a worthy choice. It's consuming but worthy. But now with kids, people say like, well, it's your life. She tried to avoid pouring salt on the wounds of the mommy wars. Every time she came to a place where her remarks might imply judgment or criticism, she held back or qualified her speech. But she's conscious of the problem and she spelled it out. She said, we're always in a weird place when it comes to family size, because it's like if you make too big a thing of it, well, then you're being pretty ungracious to people who, for whatever reason, don't have kids. But if you make too little of it, then you start to feel this, feed this idea of like, who would want to really do that? And is this even really valuable work for somebody? So lesson number 6, mothering is a skill and not just a state. It's not unskilled labor. Danielle believes that such kind of soft denigration of motherhood as a life choice is part of the story of why women rarely choose to dedicate their lives to having children. She doesn't think that's the whole story. She also blames ignorance about the life course, evidenced by a social patterning of women's life plans on the model of a male life plan. First, secure a professional income, then secure a family. She pointed out that the path of schooling for women leads inexorably through the years when it would be easiest and most favorable to have children, which is pretty much where you all are now. She said, I think there's a piece of the story of growing up female in America that's like you can be and you can do anything. And when you've accomplished all of these goals that are time sensitive, and then you can do these other things. And for some people, that's true. But many people can't have children without medical assistance, late into their 30s or 40s. And I feel like there's a lot of people who never even think about it until they're starting to get to the point where they are worried. Because there's so much like hit the ground running, high school, college, grad school, build your careers, professions, your track. It's hard not to see her commentary as partly autobiographical. Earlier, she said about her maternity leave, I realized it was the first time in my life that I hadn't just sort of gone from one thing to the next. I came up for air and realized I don't want to keep doing this. She went on, I know this is so controversial, but truthfully, I would not want to go back and do my medical training now. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm too tired, So there's a sense in which there are some things best done young, like maybe medical training. But I also think that sometimes having kids is one of those things. Like it's easier when you're younger. It seems to be easier, she said. It seems to be. I don't know if this is horrible to say, but I think there's some ways too that when you're younger, the transition to kids is easier. I think that shift for my friends who've been older, it can be so hard because you put in all this effort and then you're used to you're used to that in terms of control. And what do I mean by that? Well, the big thing that you have to figure out how to handle when you have children is like the loss of control of your schedule and your day. And the older and more competent you are at work, the harder that is to live through. And you can do it, you can live through it, but it is a big shock when you're 35. When you're 20, it's like, and what's next? This was easy, got that. All right, moving on. So yeah, she went on, I want to be cautious here because I do think there's a sense in which there's very little thought early on. And I've had lots of conversations with professional women kind of into their late 20s and 30s that are all of a sudden taking stock, like, hey, what do I do? What do I even want family-wise? What is going to be possible? And I just feel like that question's not even on the table. And it would feel antithetical. And sometimes like there's a strong sense of betrayal of people who've invested in their career. It's complicated. I don't want to say like, oh, women shouldn't do anything interesting academically. I don't believe that at all. But I do think we should ask the question when we look at the progress of feminism in general. So women's work and education and work crowd out time for having children. And even when, and this is true, even when women want and expect to have families, it begins with the long march of formal schooling, undifferentiated from the male timeline. It continues through college, graduate training, residencies, assistantships. None of these programs is normed or set up for part-time progress, even if there are some renegades who pull it off. Where part-time options do exist, and you may know this, women often pass them up for fear of being relegated to second-class status. The sense of betrayal that Danielle mentions is real. Women who've been encouraged to look at career building single-mindedly suddenly find themselves up against a gut-wrenching quandary they don't remember opting into. Their desire for a home and children on the one hand, and the fruition of years of training on the other. Most of the time, women, we know this from the data, most of the time women just split the difference, leaving neither side of the choice incredibly fulfilled or fulfilling. Mothering small children while working makes motherhood less enjoyable. And working while juggling family responsibilities taints the natural satisfactions of throwing oneself into a career. Those are real and they're great, but it's a lot less satisfying if you have to constantly be interrupted. Danielle continued, there's no option for a part-time residency. You can't say, I'm going to do this over 6 years instead of 3 because I have young children and I want to be around for them. I feel like these are important formative years. There are certainly some places, she said, that it's changing. Some fellowships are a bit part-time. But there are some academic programs that are accommodating, but it's just arbitrary. And she says, I'm speculating here, but part of that's probably because a lot of these things in formation were formed for men who had different biological reality, and it feels very hard to comment on. So lesson number 7, there's only 8, we're almost done. Lesson number 7, having a family needs to be planned for. Your career will happen pretty much without your planning it. And probably this is not what you're being told. The reason your career will happen without your planning it is because all of the social scripts are normed for that. It'll just, everybody will, at each stage will offer you like the next step along the way. So you have to plan for being able to have a family and plan your career around being able to have a family, right? What's the alternative? Plan your kids around your career? It's going to get you 1.6. All right, Danielle had a way of turning things on their heads. She said, we don't want to judge family size, so we don't praise childbearing. But when we don't praise childbearing, people conclude it's not worth doing. And that has implications about the value of children themselves, she said. She advanced a counter thesis. She said to me, well, I think my children are good for the world. I don't know, like in general, I think people are good for the world. The overall notion of like, this is a good thing. These children are good. It's just good, right? The idea, she went on, the idea of a tapestry in generation and the handing down of wisdom from one generation to the next, and faith and looking back and looking forward and seeing, like through scripture, you know, the tapestries of a family and even some of the hard places, but the places that you see, you know, it's so profound. But a strong thing in my life has been feeling like they're a gift. They really are a gift, and it's a privilege to have them and to raise them and to know them. Danielle here reminded me of the biblical Hannah. She had an almost reverential attitude toward the gift of children. Interestingly, as a rule, that attitude wasn't present in my subjects' memories of what got them started having children, but it was deeply present in their descriptions of how it was going. So lesson number 8 is that children are a blessing, like health and wealth. No one would say, I'm done having wealth. No one would say, I'm done being healthy. But people do say all the time, I'm done having children. And they ask you, are you done having children? America's Hannahs didn't think you could have too many children any more than they thought you could have too much wealth or too much health. It's a very different attitude. Now, practically what that works out to is a really interesting question, not the subject of this talk, but I just want you to see how different that attitude is. Danielle recalled with consternation towards the end of our interview that as a young woman, she didn't even think about what would happen if she didn't have any children. But I should have, she said. In another place, which I'm not quoting, she said, I could almost cry when I think about it. She said to me, I've had older women say, oh, I wish I could have or would have had one more or more, period. I do think hearing these things are little pieces of encouragement that sort of reinforce the idea that this is hard, but it's a gift too. She said she hadn't thought about missing out on children, in part because, as she told us, from the time I was a young child, I wanted to be a physician. And she had thought that the practice of medicine would be the sort of identifying manifestation of being conformed to Christ. So she really had a vocational call. But after having children, she found herself embracing more and more that motherhood was her way of being transformed into Christ. So much that when she declared that being a full-time mom was her doing something else, she used the image of a shepherd. She said, for me, it's like me parenting, shepherding, nurturing, teaching, and fostering the growth of these people. She continued, we teach our children that the Lord delights in them. I also want them to have that borne out in their experience, just to have that unwavering sense of like, I'm for you, like I'm for you. Ultimately, the kids weren't for her to make her into something more and better or different, but she was for them. She was for them. Talk about turning things around. Their goodness didn't mean desiring them for the sake of having them, like possessions, but having them for the sake of desiring them, delighting in them, the way the Lord delights in us. So why aren't women having the families that they want? 55 interviews, women of all levels of income and engagement with paid work, convinced me that we aren't having those families because we as women want conflicting things. We do want 2 or 3 kids, but we also want degrees and jobs and travel and experiences. We want kids, I think, a little bit like we want to get in shape. We want them, but not enough to pay the price. We aren't always putting first things first. I think we need to stop blaming the culture and start looking inside. And I think it can stop with your generation, because these lessons are knowable and they're teachable and they're actionable. And with God's grace, we can count on their effectiveness. Yes, they are hard to practice, but no harder than anything else worth doing. So I'm encouraging you today and to spread the message to get off the train that someone else put you on, to come up for the air for the first time. Growing up female in America, I think you can do and be anything, but you can also have a family, and this is how. Thank you. I think there's time for a few questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Madeline Stapel. I'm a dual master's student at George Mason and the University of Malta.
Okay.
And I'm the kind of person who just, based on where I am going in my career, it's the kind of thing that could end in a very high-powered career. But I also recognize that I do want to be a stay-at-home mom. And so I often will come to events like this or whatever, and I'll literally, I've done it today, ask people like, hey, do you know any nice Jewish boys who would be right for me?
Way to go.
I mean, if I don't know them, maybe someone else does. And so from my generation, people are usually like, oh yeah, you know, that I'll let you know. I don't know anyone that I can think of off the top of my head. But then when I talk to older people and mentors, they're like, why do you care about that yet? You're 21, you have plenty of time. And I struggle to find the right way to respond to that. So how would you suggest I respond to that?
The way to respond to those older generation, kind of wondering what, I don't know, just smile. Because they're older, so you should be respectful. But you can turn and walk away and think like, well, they just don't. I mean, to some extent, the problems we're describing here, this is why I say this can change with you guys. And to some extent with my generation, my mom's generation, the whole message was like, you know, have your kids and be done and then do the real stuff. So I really do think they got it wrong. The messaging was wrong. They didn't, but you know, they were also, I would say that generation, they were also fed things that were terribly wrong about population, right? So they grew up in a world where they were told every day, and to some extent it's still around, like there's too many people in the world. I mean, they really believed this. They drank the Kool-Aid. It was completely wrong. And I could, you know, give you all the economic reasons why it's completely wrong. So, I mean, just be respectful, but like turn your back and say, you know, I don't have to believe that. That's incorrect. But you're right. I think that this is very much more prevalent among, you know, maybe your parents' generation, but certainly your grandparents' generation, and they can't get it. And keep asking about the Jewish boys, because this is totally how it works. I mean, among my friends who are, you know, my children are really exactly your age, many of them, and they're starting to get married and get engaged. And, you know, among my friends, we're always like, well, wait, do you have, I just met this great family in Dallas. I'm like, wait, what are the ages of your kids? Do ours line up at all? Right. I mean, and listen, people, like, this is what people did for thousands of years. Like, this isn't weird or retrograde. It's not, you know, arranged marriages where kids don't have a choice, but like introducing people, 100%. Keep asking. Yes.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a student at Liberty, and
Great.
I heard you say that the system today is more geared towards men and their life plans. So what would you say to a girl who's in high school and she wants to become a mom, or a girl who's in college like me and wants to become a mom, but there's really no option for that at the moment? What does that life plan maybe look like for her?
Well, one thing is, I think it's, so, I mean, look, I'm standing up here with a lot of degrees behind my name. I'm sort of like not against people going to college. That's not the message here. But the message is really to keep, I think, the heart you have for the priority of family and children, to surround yourself. I mean, honestly, conservative colleges are a great place to be, to meet men who also prioritize family. I mean, look, that's just true. But what does it look like? I do think it means, you know, thinking ahead. I just had so this happens to me a lot. I get called or emailed by young women trying to make decisions. And I just talked to a young woman about to go into the Marine Reserve officers training this summer. And she's dating a nice guy. And she said, like, look, I just realized that engineering is not my path, but maybe it's going to be medicine. We had a long conversation. I said, those are great things. But she was thinking about it more in terms of what was a good match for her talents and interests. I said, but you want to get married, you're dating a great guy. you've got to work backwards induction. Like which of these things that are also a good fit for your talents and interests are most flexible if you know that you want to be able to have kids and make. So you said, what does it look like going backwards? And I think it means being sort of ruthlessly honest about how you may need to sort of adjust or choose things that are more flexible, more, if you have an option between one or two things, getting your education done as quickly as possible. Actually, I think a lot of homeschoolers are transitioning to college earlier. I know a few. That's a good thing. A lot of students are getting through college more quickly than in the past. I have a son who did it in 2.5 years because he met the love of his life and said, I want to get married. And no one's going to take me seriously if I'm still in college. So I'm going to, he took like 8 classes at once. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? So he's just get through it. So I think kind of questioning the timelines, like just getting through those things more quickly could be part of the answer, but not, avoiding places where you'll meet family-minded men. That's a good thing to do. Yeah.
This will be our last question.
Sweet. Okay, great. I'm so close to the front.
You don't need the mic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for the people in the back so they can hear you. Yeah.
My name is Rebecca Phillips, and I go to Patrick Community College. Okay. I'm the oldest of 7, and I'm very grateful for my large family. But I do know, like a lot of friends in the homeschooling big family world, especially the oldest, they feel like kind of burnt out almost because they were like a parent. And so, what would your advice be to parents of big families and also children or siblings in large families to encourage them to continue that legacy and not feel like they got the short end of the stick because their parent was run thin or something like that?
In many ways, what I'm saying is born out of that. So I was the oldest of 9. So I totally get that. I was definitely, and I would say that, as the oldest of 9, I thought, having kids is great. I'm sure it's, I was like super pro-life and I wanted the world to have more babies in it. But I figured that was like my younger sisters were going to do that. So I thought like, I'm going to, go change the world through, the high-powered future or career. But I will tell you that, so I think number one, like it's okay to be the person who feels a little bit burnt out. And like, I wasn't planning to get married till I was 30. So got married when I was 23. So that was not my plan at all. So, kind of, I want to just say just quickly, it's okay to feel burnt out and to think like, I need to really think this over and take time. But I would also say, and something that I do now, constantly, and I think this was Danielle's experience, you will not feel the same way about your own children that you did about your younger siblings. And that sometimes when sometimes we can be a little bit, we can be jaded because we think we know what it means to already have kids. We're like, oh, I've been there, I've done that. I saw my mom, like, I know what kids are about. They're great. I really love my little siblings. It's just not the same at all. So when I had my first son, much sooner than I expected, when I was 23 still, and I was in a PhD program at that point, I remember just looking around thinking like, does everybody feel this way about their kids? Like, this is a revelation. It's a revelation. Like, I was like, this is astonishing. I can't believe it. So I was like, wow, I guess these people don't like their kids as much, or they didn't get so lucky. My son is like obviously the most enjoyable baby ever, but that was a surprise to me, right? Because I did enjoy being from a big family. But I didn't expect to enjoy my first child as much as I did. And so a lot of, I think the messaging is a combination of, it's okay. You don't have to run right into a family. I did because I met my husband and I wanted to get married. But I didn't think that I needed to. I wasn't planning for it. I wasn't like out shopping for a husband at that point. So it's okay to be burnt out. It's okay to take your time. It's okay but then also just to kind of keep that optimism and that sense of expectation that there's nothing like being a mother to your own child. It will not be anything like being an older sister, even though being an older sister is great. Yeah. So, you're welcome.
All right, let's give Kathy a round of applause. Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
really sharing everything. So now we will be doing a group photo, and then after that, we'll do some more photos with you. So if everyone wants to come up to the front here, we'll do a group photo.
We're gonna move.
Yeah,
this
we really
table, so
do.
take care of
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Allen. I am a rising junior at Grand Canyon University, and I'm one of the interns at the Luce Center this summer. I hope you're all enjoying the summit. I know I am. The speakers have been really great so far. We're so glad you're here, and it is my honor to be able to introduce Allie Beth Stuckey. Allie Beth is a born Texan, but is now a wife and mom of 3, raising her children in Georgia. She's passionate about helping women build up their worldview upon the truth of God's word, which has led her to start the wildly popular podcast Relatable and to publish her first book, You're Not Enough and That's Okay, Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love, and her second book, Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit the Christian Compassion, will be coming out later this year. Allie Beth has been seen on Fox News, The Ben Shapiro Sunday Special, The Sean Hannity Show, and many others. And she is now here to share with you insights on her recent book. It is my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Allie Beth Stuckey.
Hello, thank you so much for hosting me. I love this organization. I've had the privilege of working with y'all and speaking for y'all for several years now, and y'all really are so privileged to be here and be a part of it. So thank you so much. As my introduction said, I am talking about the theme of my new book, which will be out this October. I had to push really hard for it to come out before the election because this book is particularly for women, and even more particularly for Christian women. The subtitle of my book, after Toxic Empathy, is How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. How progressives exploit Christian compassion. And today I am going to explain exactly what I mean by that. And even though this is just kind of an introduction to my book, and you'll get the full explanation there, I'm going to give you hopefully some really good tools as you are engaging in conversations with your friends before the election over the coming months. We got to witness an incredible debate last night. Did everyone stay up to watch it and add your commentary? It was amazing. This isn't even really a part of what I want to talk about, but I want to talk about it because I've just been in a hotel room. I haven't been able to discuss it with anyone. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Let me just share. I thought for sure Joe Biden would give us a good 20 minutes. I thought, okay, 20 minutes until things to really start to fall off, but he's going to come out the gate. He's going to be really strong. His team understands that's how long the cocktail needs to last. And then people are probably going to turn the channel, right? Oh my goodness, right out the gate. I was like, this is not good. This is not good for Biden. I saw a meme that was like, if you're the kind of person that gets sad when you see an old person sitting by themselves in a restaurant eating soup, do not watch this debate. And that's how I felt. I felt like I couldn't watch it. And I thought that Trump did a really good job. I really did. And I am someone who is really honest about Trump. I would tell you if I thought that he did a bad job. In 2020, I don't know if you remember that fateful debate where he was against Joe Biden and he just came across like a bully. Like he just kept on interrupting him, and he might have been correct in everything that he said, but the persona, the attitude that he gave off was very off-putting. So I was just hoping and praying going into last night that he would be self-controlled and even sympathetic at some points to Joe Biden. And he was. I don't know if y'all noticed how restrained he was, how self-controlled he was. I think the most kind of out of sorts he got was when they were talking about the golf game. Did y'all notice that? You're not a 6 handicap. And that he was like, that's the biggest lie of all. I've seen your swing. I know your swing. You're not a 6 handicap. And that just really made me laugh. Joe Biden, the reason why Joe Biden won the last election, there are a variety of factors that went into this, but at the end of the day, women supported Joe Biden. And they supported Joe Biden because of this title that he was given, even though he was, even in 2020, pretty doddering and a pretty pitiful figure. It was obvious even then that he was in some kind of cognitive decline. I think we really saw that tragically the most last night, but we saw glimpses of it in 2020. And yet women had a lot of compassion, and I think politically were very attracted to Joe Biden because of this title that I heard over and over again. And that was the, I don't know if they use this exact terminology, but I heard it a lot in female circles, the empath in chief, that he is the empathy giver in chief, that he was the adult in the room who was not only going to bring maturity to the conversation, experience to the world stage, he was going to bring everything back to normal and stability, but he was also going to bring empathy to the conversation. And this is a word that I have heard in the political context more than ever over the past few years. It's a word that I'm familiar with. I even think of that passage in scripture that says we serve a high priest who can, in the NIV, empathize with our weaknesses. And I've always understood empathy to simply mean being able to feel what someone else feels, kind of putting yourself in their shoes, understanding their perspective, understanding their pain. And so the Biden administration, they tried to contrast him, or the Biden campaign in 2020 tried to contrast him to Donald Trump, who they projected as some kind of narcissist, this uncaring guy who would completely flippantly separate babies from their parents at the border. And then Biden would come in and he would show empathy. Empathy today, we are told, especially in the social political realm, is the highest value that we can have. In fact, that is what determines if you are a good person, if you are a thinking person, if your politics are right. Are your politics led by empathy? And I really saw this more than ever in 2020. Do you remember 2020? I'm looking at some of you. Some of you are like 12 in 2020, which is hard for me to wrap my mind around that was 4 years ago, that 4.5 years ago almost, we had COVID. But you remember the summer of 2020, George Floyd, end of May, I think it was the beginning of June, June 3rd, that all of a sudden we opened our Instagrams and there were black squares. I was scrolling and I thought, Instagram is glitching. People's pictures aren't showing up. What is this? And then I realized it was a trend that a lot of people were latching onto. They were participating in. Christians, pastors, influencers, left, right, center. Their captions may have differed. Maybe if you were on the left, you might have said something along the lines of Black Lives Matter, pay money to Black people. That was a caption that we saw. And then maybe if you were a Christian, you said something like, do justice, love mercy, or all made in God's image. And I just thought, what is this about? Why are we posting a black square? There are people who die tragically every day, even in very unjust ways. And so what is it about this moment that is such a flashpoint that is creating these fault lines in the church specifically? And I am an evangelical woman. And while I care about things that are going on in our country, I'm particularly interested in evangelical women and how we think and the worldview that we build, the kinds of content that we are consuming. And what I saw was many Christian women who I still respect in a lot of ways, but respected then, who I followed, who I felt were strong on the word of God, completely reiterate without much thinking what the secular world was doing and saying around so-called racial and social justice. I mean, some of the most prominent Christians in the evangelical world were promoting the likes of Ibram X. Kendi, how to be an anti-racist. We're promoting Robin DiAngelo, white fragility, promoting ideas like systemic racism, institutional racism, white privilege, white supremacy, and then attaching Trump and all of his supporters to that narrative. And at the time, while I do, of course, have compassion to anyone who is a true victim of discrimination, no matter what the color of their skin is, and of course, I had the same visceral reaction when I initially saw the video of George Floyd. I thought, this is not the right way to approach this issue. This is clearly an issue that is being used for political purposes to try to castigate everyone not on the left as a racist, as the scary side of things, as the non-compassionate, non-loving side of things. And I'm seeing Christians emphasize and repeat a definition of justice that is not actually just according to God's word. Saying that all Black and brown people are on the side of the oppressed one way or another, and all white people are on the side of the oppressor or the privileged, that is not justice according to God's word, and it's not even factually or historically accurate. And yet very smart Christians, especially white evangelical women, were pushing this narrative, and this narrative then laid the groundwork for social justice policies like defunding the police or reimagining the police. And we know from data now the effects of those policies. More people have died because of those policies. And yet, at the time when I certainly wasn't the only one, but I felt like I was in the evangelical woman space at the time, when I pushed back on that, when I said, hang on, is this what God's definition of justice is? I saw Christians saying riots are the voice of the unheard. Really? Because we have innocent people, their lives and their livelihoods are being taken away because of these riots. Tell me what stealing a flat screen TV has to do with George Floyd's life. You weren't allowed to ask questions like that. Of course, I was called all kinds of names. But the one thing I was told over and over again in my messages from women who purported to be Christians was, have some empathy. Have some empathy. And it wasn't just, hey, you should have some compassion, because I did. What I was trying to point out was these people over here who are victims of the riots, they matter too. Their lives matter too. Their homes, their towns, they matter too. Riots are the voice of the unheard is not of a justification for violence that we see in scripture. So what is going on here? Why do I keep being chided in the same way? Have some empathy. Have some empathy. Well, I've thought about this a lot over the past 4 years. And what I've seen is that this is the same kind of retort we see when it comes to all kinds of issues. When it comes to abortion, when it comes to LGBTQ, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to guns, women in particular are met with this message, have some empathy. And what is implied there is if you have empathy, you will be progressive. If you have empathy, you will be on the left side of the issue. If you have empathy when it comes to so-called social and racial justice, you, white woman, will sit back and shut up. Not only that, but you will agree with the left-wing narrative. You'll affirm this narrative of systemic racism and support all the measures that BLM activists say are necessary to fight white supremacy. But then when it comes to these other issues that I listed, here's typically what it sounds like, the message that we in particular are targeted with. If you have empathy, you'll support a woman's right to choose because abortion is healthcare. If you have empathy, you'll use someone's preferred pronouns because trans women are women. If you have empathy, you'll accept the redefinition of marriage and family because love is love. If you have empathy, you'll welcome the migrant because no human being is illegal. If you have empathy, you'll embrace DEI initiatives because social justice is justice. If you have empathy, in other words, if you put yourself in the shoes of the supposedly marginalized and victimized person, if you feel what they feel, you will not only acknowledge their pain, but you will affirm it. And not only will you affirm it, but you will grant it the authority to then dictate public policy. This is what I like to call empathy bullying, or empathy manipulation, or empathy shaming, or empathy coercion, or empathy hijacking. There are a lot of terms that we could use. And yet, in all of the uses of this form of toxic empathy, it is used to support meaningless, circular, yet heartstring pulling mantras to trap you. The truth is that empathy is a terrible guide to determine what is right and wrong, what is good and bad policy. when it leads us, when it drives our decisions, especially when it comes to public policy, it causes great harm. So, for example, empathy that affirms the choice of a pregnant woman to get an abortion leads to the brutal murder of a baby, and it does not heal the woman that we are saying we have empathy for. Empathy that affirms transgenderism leads to the mutilation of the bodies of adults and minors. It puts the privacy and protection of women and children at risk. Empathy that affirms the redefinition of marriage leads to physical and spiritual harm for those who engage in it and encourages motherlessness and fatherlessness for children. Empathy that affirms the right of immigrants to enter the country illegally leads to chaos, to an increase of trafficking, terrorism, and violence. Empathy that affirms the narrative of systemic racism leads to policies that increase crime, that disenfranchise non-minorities and crush minorities under the weight of the bigotry of low expectations. Empathy can make us very stupid, leading to very harmful, horrible, and dangerous policy. Now, empathy is not always bad. Feeling what someone else feels can be a very powerful force. I have a brother with special needs that has helped me see people with disabilities in a different way than perhaps someone who has never been around a person with disabilities would have. It has, I think, grown in me a sense of compassion that perhaps is deeper because of the experiences that I have. Becoming a mom, I think, has grown my empathy so much for other women and for children. I understand a temper tantrum now, both from the mom and the dad. It's so easy before you have kids when you're on a plane and the baby is crying and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, how is this affecting me? I can't sleep. I can't focus. This is terrible. I can't believe I got stuck by a baby. Well, having kids has completely changed that mentality because I understand that that mom is struggling a lot more than I am. And if there's anyone on this whole plane who wants that baby to stop crying, it is the mom. And so our experiences can grow in us empathy, the ability to feel what someone else feels. And that can absolutely be powerful. It can motivate us to love people well. But, and this is something that I learned in Abigail Schreier's book, Bad Therapy. I really encourage you to read that if you haven't already. She describes a lot of children today who are going to public schools who are really being turned into left-wing activists in a lot of ways. She describes them as full of empathy and mean as hell. Full of empathy, mean as hell. And what she argued when I was talking to her on my show is that you can have deep empathy and be an angry, bitter, mean person because your empathy can actually blind you to what is good and right and true. If you have such deep feeling for this one particular person that has driven you to affirm and to authorize their feelings as what should drive policy or what should drive a certain decision, you are blind to the needs of other people, and therefore you are unable to justly and important decision. You are blind to the needs of other people, and therefore you are unable to justly and impartially make good decisions. So empathy is not actually necessary to do good. It is not necessary to be kind. A much better motivation than empathy to do the right thing is virtue. Virtue is much better than empathy. Virtue is led by objective morality that is rooted in higher truth. So we have mercy for the vulnerable and the disabled, for example, because it is the right thing to do. We should feel compassion for the struggling mom, whether or not we've been there, because it is the right thing to feel. We should be kind to those around us, helping those in need, not necessarily because we've been where they are, but because it is the right thing to do. Now, as a Christian, I know that this higher truth, this objective morality is found in God's word, which tells me to love my neighbor, not when I feel like it, not when I've been there, not when I can put myself in their shoes, not when I feel empathy for them, but just because they are there, just because they're made in the image of God. I am empowered to love my neighbor well, not because of empathy, which is a feeling that is always waxing and waning based on our mood, based on our politics, based on the circumstances, but by the Holy Spirit, who never changes, who never waxes or wanes. And even for those who are not Christians, it should be the foundation of morality and virtue that leads us to do the right thing, the compassionate thing, not this undulating feeling of empathy, which can blind us to the truth of any situation. Love and empathy are not the same thing. That's something I've noticed over the past few years as I've seen this term used more and more by these influencers, these kind of pseudo therapists on social media that tell you that loving yourself is the highest good. They talk a lot about empathy and they use empathy and love interchangeably, but empathy and love are not the same. Empathy is a feeling, but love is a choice. It's an action, it's a force. And I believe that the God who is love, that's what 1 John 4:8 says, God is love, that he, because he is love, gets to define love. And he gets to say what is and what isn't, what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. He gets to tell us what love is. And he says in 1 Corinthians 13:6 that love is, among other things, a force that never rejoices in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love loves truth. So true love is bound by truth. It is grounded in moral and factual truth. Therefore, virtue and love go hand in hand. So a much better way to guide our lives, to guide our decisions, especially when it comes to policy, is virtue, truth, and true love. So rather than focusing on feeling how someone feels, let us consider which policies are rooted in natural rights, which promote human flourishing, which affirm statistical and biological realities, which bring about order and justice rather than disorder and chaos. When we have these factors in mind, these standards in mind, instead of empathy, which really is superficial, we see that abortion is always wrong because killing an innocent person is always wrong. We can love the pregnant woman in a way that does not include giving her the right to murder her baby. We can provide resources. We can show up for her. We can make sure that she is not alone, that she is cared for. The left loves to say that we are only pro-birth. That could not be further from the truth. If you are not involved in your local pregnancy center, get involved, whether that is volunteering once a month, whether you're making a $5 donation every month. You have no idea the effect that that can have generationally on women's lives, on their babies' lives. I hear a lot even from Christians who have been so empathy shamed into being personally pro-life, but politically pro-choice, or they'll say that they are holistically pro-life, which typically means that they're for legal abortion, but they're also for open borders and they're also for social justice because they lump all of this into some big pro-life issue. It's very strange. I call them the mushy middle. And a lot of Christians, unfortunately, fall into that. They so often say, well, I can't be against banning abortion until XYZ is done, until we provide more for women, until women don't want to have abortions anymore. Well, I ask them, when's the last time you volunteered? When's the last time you were a part of the work that you're saying needs to be done? Because this work that you say needs to be done has been being done for decades at local pregnancy centers. Are you involved? Are you giving money, or are you just complaining on the couch? If you're just complaining on the couch about things not being done, then I don't think that you have the authority at all to be pro-choice. Because what you're saying really is that you're pro-abortion. You're not even contributing to the resources that would allow a woman to choose life. And plus, someone's right not to be murdered is not dependent upon the accessibility of welfare or any other resource. A baby is a human being, period. And when we are led not just by empathy for the pregnant woman or empathy for the pro-choice cause, but reality, truth, natural rights, we see that. When we move past empathy and into the realm of truth and truth-filled love, we see that gender ideology is dangerous because it is untrue. And therefore, calling a man she is a lie. And it is a damaging lie. You cannot be born in the wrong body. And lying in that way is physically, emotionally, and spiritually disastrous for a person. There's male and female, period. That is the loving thing to say. That is the loving reality to affirm. Someone who is confused about that should lovingly be helped to reconcile their mind with their body, not the other way around. When we move past empathy into truth-filled love, we see that redefining marriage as anything other than a man or a woman promotes a similar lie to gender ideology, that men and women are interchangeable. And what that leads to is this nonsensical idea that moms and dads are interchangeable or replaceable. We can show kindness to everyone in our lives while also affirming that the government should not have the power to redefine something like marriage that it did not create. Marriage and its ability in principle to create children is a necessary building block of society. Moms and dads are both necessary. And the womb renting and the baby buying that has become commonplace because of two men desiring to raise children is on par with human trafficking. Virtue, honor, love, truth would have us see that. When we move past this realm of superficial, toxic empathy, we see that illegal immigration actually wreaks havoc on our country. Just this week alone, we've seen story after story of women and girls raped and murdered by men who have entered this country illegally. Now, you may hear sometimes that, well, illegal migrants or undocumented migrants, they might say, commit fewer crimes than natural-born citizens. I have a couple things to say to that, just as an aside. Number one, they are by definition undocumented, and so we do not have the documentation to prove that. There is no way to prove the number of crimes that are committed by illegal migrants. We simply do not know that. That's typically trotted out by the Cato Institute, who is very pro open borders, but that is not even a true retort or a true statistic. Even if it were true, just because we have a bunch of homegrown violent psychopaths doesn't mean that I want the rest of the world to. Okay? So we already have citizens that commit crimes. We don't want non-citizens also committing crimes too. That's another reason why it's not a good argument. Third reason why that's not a good argument is because every crime committed by an illegal alien, unlike the crimes committed by citizens, is preventable. Every single one is preventable. We can't prevent every crime. We should be able to prevent every crime by an illegal alien because they should not be here. Because we should have borders. Because borders were God's idea. Nations were God's idea. Governments were God's idea. Laws were God's idea, because God is a God not of chaos and confusion, but of order and peace. And while we are here in this fallen world, He understands that we need parameters, we need categories, we need cultures, we need nations, we need languages, we need laws, we need checks on chaos and checks on evil in order to flourish and in order to protect the most vulnerable. Therefore, shutting down our border is the way to love our neighbor. It would have been the way to love Laken Riley. It would have been the way to love Kate Steinle and Molly Tibbetts and Jocelyn Nungarai. The list goes on. Closing down our border would have been the way to love them. And yet, toxic empathy would only have you think about the person from Honduras who wants to be here. We can have compassion for that person, for the person who is fleeing for a better life, without upending our own nation and promoting the chaos that kills. When we move past this toxic, superficial empathy, we see that social justice kills. Social justice kills. How many times have you seen a headline of someone who was raped, who was murdered by someone who should have been in prison? And yet, because of a Soros-funded prosecutor, DA, judge, who doesn't believe really in punishing for crimes, who is trying to match some kind of superficial racial quota so it doesn't look like the system disproportionately affects minorities, this person was let out of jail. People died because of this. Predominantly in minority communities, people die because of this. It's not the rich. They're not the ones who are affected by this. It's the most vulnerable. It's the poor. It's women. It's children. Light prison sentences, racial quotas for arrests, reimagining the police. This leads to more crime, especially in Black communities. Social justice kills. And yet toxic empathy and its narrative would have us believe that that is the loving position to take. It's not just that I think that it should be an option to be on the other side of the positions that I just listed to you. It's that I think all of those positions are deadly and demonic. And empathy is the vehicle by which Satan is manipulating Christian women into supporting these deleterious policies that literally slaughter children in the womb, that are an assault to biological reality that we see in the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible. What do they say about the road to hell? It's paved with what? Good intentions. A lot of people who are led by empathy have really good intentions. It's not that I think all women who are on this side of these issues, that they want chaos, that they want murder. I don't even think a lot of them know what happens in an abortion. Now, at this point, that ignorance is a choice. I'm not letting them off the hook there. But of course, I think because we are feeling people, I think women feel more and we don't compartmentalize as much as men. That's a good thing. That's a strength that we have. I'm not saying we should shut off our emotions, that we shouldn't feel any empathy ever. I'm saying there is a better guide. I'm saying that empathy shouldn't be the driver of our politics, shouldn't be the driver of our morality. It shouldn't be the determinant of our choices. It may be one good part of our system, our apparatus of virtue, but it should not be in the driver's seat. And so keep that in mind. Over the next few months, you're going to see a lot of propaganda. Lord help us, if Joe Biden stays in the race, we're going to be seeing a lot, especially about abortion, because this is what they think, that if women are going to determine this race, according to Pew Research right now, 51% of women, including, interestingly enough, 72% of never married women, are going to vote for Joe Biden. They are on the left. They are trusting that women do not care about the debates. They are trusting that women do not even really care that much about the foreign policy. What they care about are these empathy-centric issues. What they care about is abortion in particular. And if they can manipulate your friends, not you, because you all would never be manipulated by that, but your friends, your family members, if they can trick them into thinking that in order to be an empathetic, compassionate, good person, then you have to vote for Joe Biden or else you're a racist bigot who hates women, that's what they will do. And you all know, you probably all have women in your life who are susceptible to that line of reasoning. And you might be the only thing in her life stopping her from thinking that way. Now, this is not even necessarily about Republican and Democrat. Maybe your friend will not vote. Maybe they'll vote for someone that is disappointing to you. It's not really about that. This is much bigger. This is cultural. This is social. This is even theological and spiritual. Because if someone is on the wrong side of these issues, they are on the wrong side of very fundamental biblical issues. Many of these issues go all the way back to Genesis 1. And you might be the person in your friend's life who God uses to plant these seeds, to change their mind. I know it can be demoralizing. You all feel like you're swimming upstream in so many ways, in college, with your friend group, wherever you are, maybe even with your family members. But I can tell you, as someone who has taken my fair share of arrows and heat, that what makes it worth it is when you realize, maybe it's 5-10 years later, someone comes to you and says, you don't know this. You don't remember this. But that one conversation we had where you asked me that question, you suggested that article, you made that one comment. After that, I became pro-life. It took me a long time, but I realized it because I couldn't get that question out of my head. You are not responsible for winning every argument and for changing someone's mind in one conversation. You are a seed planter, and everyone can do that. That means that you do not have to have the perfect argument. You don't have to be perfectly eloquent. You don't have to know all the answers. You might get tripped up. You might not remember that statistic that you wanted to recall in that moment. But when you think of yourself as a seed planter, there's really not that much of a science to planting seeds. You just have to do it. You just have to be brave enough to do it. And remember this too, that courage is contagious. Remember that in the coming months, that courage is contagious. Your courage to stand up for the life of the unborn, to stand up for these issues that seem so controversial to the world, that really should not be at all, it is contagious. And just remember this time that you are also spending with these like-minded women, and remember that you're not alone. I like to say, and this is the name of the event that I'm hosting in September, it's called Share the Arrows. Because I realized, again, in 2020, it was such a learning season for me, that that's what we have to do. When you see a friend, either online or in class, wherever the context is, who is standing up for what is right, controversial, is swimming upstream, and they're taking heat for it. For example, there was this young woman, she was a student at Savannah College of Art and Design. She decided for her senior project that she was going to do a photography project. I'm not an artist at all. I'm sure that there's some special name for it. And it was about what womanhood is. And she took pictures of a detransitioner and told her story through photographs. Oh my goodness. I don't know if y'all are familiar with SCAD, but SCAD is extremely progressive. Savannah, Georgia is extremely progressive. She had professors, teachers, students, people outside the school in Savannah, in the state of Georgia, coming after her. There was a petition that was signed by the student body saying that she should not be able to graduate. And in that moment, what kept her strong were people who stood with her and shared her stuff and said, you know what? Whatever arrows you are sending her way, you can send them my way too. Whatever name you want to call her, you can call me too. Call me whatever you want. I don't care. There is power in that. So when you see your friend taking heat for something, rather than saying, I'm so glad that's not me, I'm just going to kind of back away over here and hope that I don't take those consequences. Don't do that. That is not treating someone how you would want to be treated. How you would want to be treated in that moment is to see your friend stand up with you, link arms with you, and say, yeah, send those arrows my way too. Standing against toxic empathy, standing against all of these very serious and sensitive and complicated issues that I just listed today, standing on the side of biblical truth will be unpopular. You will get backlash one way or another, but lives are on the line. Truth is on the line, and it's absolutely worth it. Thank you. I'm going to take some questions. Sorry.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand.
I'm going to grab a chair because shoes, but they're uncomfortable.